Well, good morning. As we see folks file into the Zoom room, it is wonderful to have you with us this morning. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director of Episcopal Parish Network, and welcome to our first and certainly not our last parish administrator gathering, along with friends from vestry and lay leaders and clergy leaders around facility maintenance and taking care of your property. We are really pleased this morning to be joined by our friends from Cool Solutions to help us work through some of the challenges around maintaining your building, maintaining your facilities, making sure that they are up to speed and that you are not faced with challenges that you were not expecting. So thanks to Cool for this, and we hope that you will be sparked to conversation with your other lay leaders and clergy leaders by what they have to share this morning. We will be following a rhythm of 30 minutes of presentation and answering questions and comments that come into the chat. Please do use the chat. And then taking a 5-minute break, then another 30 minutes, same thing, questions and comments at the end, and then a 5-minute break. And then we will do a wrap up with all three of our subject matter experts here. Thank you so much to them for joining. Thanks to Jim Lamb, who is the head of our parish administrator group. We invite those of you who are parish administrators or hold a title that would be similar to a parish administrator responsible for facilities, buildings, budgeting, helping to run the parish, to join that group. You can find out more by emailing us at the email address that I will post into the chat in just a second. With no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jim to get us started. And thank you again to everybody for joining us early this morning, and to Cool for sharing their subject matter expertise on this. Jim, off to you.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's a pleasure to see you all virtually this morning, and I'm really excited about our webinar today. It has something for everyone I can see, and everybody in some capacity who's on this chat right now has something to do with facilities or maintaining facilities or being responsible for the budgets of the facilities. I know for myself, as Joe said, I'm at St. David's Episcopal Church in downtown Austin, Texas. And we have our facilities take up a whole city block, including a 9-story or 9-level parking garage, historic church that's 100 and about 73 years old. We just renovated, and besides our large 4-story building campus. So we have a lot of property as well. I know other churches have more and in different places and kind of spread out. It makes it a little bit more difficult to maintain and to keep track of. So I really am looking forward to this webinar, and I hope you are too. As Joe said, the format's going to be kind of 3 sections, and we will take a short break in between each session so you can get some coffee or answer that urgent email that you just got in your inbox while you're listening to this. So we'll be doing that. And then, as Joe said, always post your comments and questions in the chat, and then we'll either address them when you put them in or at the end of each session, however it best fits into the flow of what's happening. It's my pleasure to welcome Tim Cool, Lee Cool, and Nathan Parr from Smart Church Solutions. You may know them partly because they also put out a product called eSpace, which is a scheduling software, not just for facilities, but also for work orders and things like that. It does a lot of other things too. But they do also what they're doing today, which is helping churches maintain their facilities and being a partner with churches to help them in everything facilities and planning. So I welcome all 3 of you gentlemen. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Cool, who, by the way, Tim and Lee Cool have the coolest name I've ever heard in my life. So, and this session is about the 4 buckets of church facility budgeting. So something right off the bat, near and dear to everybody's heart is money. So, and what to do with the limited resources we have, or most of us have, at least my experience, where I am now is a very aging building. So that's always the that's always the push and pull of budgeting and facilities when everything else, programming and everything else is asking for dollars as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim Kuhl. He'll introduce himself a little bit more deeply, and I will sign off. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jim. As Jim mentioned, my name is Tim Kuhl. Honored to be with you this morning. Have known Joe for a number of years and was involved back when this was SEEP, and really appreciate you all joining us this morning. So I'm the founder of, as Joe referenced, Kuhl Solutions Group, which is our legal name, but our forward-facing name is Smart Church Solutions, and we specialize in what we refer to as facility stewardship. We're firm believers that everything on earth belongs to God, including our facilities. And as such, we have been entrusted to steward all of those things. And so facility stewardship is our primary business. We accomplish it through software, consulting, facility condition assessments, and then training, as well as sort of like what we're doing today. So we're going to talk about the 4 buckets of church facility budgeting. So I'm going to jump right in here. We actually have an ebook available on our website that's on the same topic that you may want to provide to your vestry and other people on your team that weren't able to attend today. A lot of what's going to be in this presentation is also in that ebook. But let's start with bucket number 1. So bucket number 1, when you're looking at your budgeting, is your operational budget. You're keeping the lights on at this point in time. Your very first bucket in that, or part of that bucket, is your utilities. We've done national benchmarking of churches twice now in the last 3-4 years. We also follow another organization called IFMA that I refer to down lower in number 4. If you're not familiar with IFMA, it stands for International Facility Managers Association. They are the largest trade organization for facility managers worldwide. They're not church-centric, but they have a community practice for religious organizations. Based on their findings and our findings, your utilities should average somewhere between $1 and $1.50 a square foot. Now, if you're in Manhattan or in certain parts of California, you can take that and just throw it out the window, because Con Edison and other people like that have so many taxes and stuff that it exceeds that. But what we have found pretty close, if you're properly maintaining your building and you have intentional ways to control your utilities, $1 to $1.50 a square foot. Now, if you're below $1 a square foot, that does not make you the energy efficiency guru. It may mean that you're underutilizing your building. Maybe you only use it 1 day a week. Janitorial, labor, material, paper products, your major carpet extractions or window cleaning, whatever other major items you do. Maybe it's a pressure washing of the building. About $1.75 to $2.50 a square foot annually. So again, one of the things you're going to want to know is how many square feet do you have, and then you can apply these to them. For general maintenance, the national average is $250 to $350. So what falls into general maintenance? That's your regular HVAC servicing. It's any of your preventive maintenance things that you do. It's your break fix items. It's the touch-up painting that you do, fixing a broken window, and so on. Staffing is another component of operational costs. And based on what we've determined and IFMA, the best run facilities have 1 full-time facility employee designated for general maintenance, not janitorial, general maintenance, in the 25 to 35,000 square foot range. Now, I can assure you that if you run the math on this, you're probably not going to be anywhere near this. Most churches underfund their staffing extraordinarily, which is why we end up with something that's going to be our second bucket that we'll talk about here in a second. But these are the benchmarkings of operational buckets. Now, a couple of disclaimers. When we talk about staffing, that does not include your managerial staffing unless your managerial staffing is also performing general maintenance tasks. So maybe you have a facility manager and 20% of his time He's a wrench turner. The other 80% of his time, he's a facility manager. Well, then 20% of his time would be applied to that 35,000 square foot FTE. Those numbers don't include grounds or insurance. Because insurance is all over the board, we did not include insurance. Grounds, as a good rule of thumb, somewhere around $6,000 per developed acre per year. And I say developed acre. Churches may have a massive amount of land. Obviously, with Jim's situation, they've got a big portion of land, but it's all covered with buildings. But you've got to, if you've got land that's not developed, meaning it doesn't have yards, doesn't have buildings or parking, that doesn't get included. Outsourcing is going to impact these numbers as well. If you have a professional facility manager and he outsources everything, then your FTE count is going to be changed a little bit. Again, this is research by us and IFMA, and this assumes, all of those numbers assume a 6 to 7 day a week active facility. So those numbers could be exaggerated if you are a 1 to 2 day a week facility. The second bucket, and this is what happens when you underfund general maintenance, underfund janitorial, and underfund your staffing, you end up with deferred maintenance. It's basically just the practice of postponing maintenance. So you're putting off today to tomorrow for what should be done today. And this is where things really start to become a problem for churches, is where they have deferred maintenance and they don't have a plan as to how they're going to attack deferred maintenance. So a couple of studies were done, and they're interesting. One said for every $1 in deferred maintenance costs, $4 of capital renewals is needed in the future. So instead of spending that $1 today, you put it off for 10 years, it's likely going to cost you at least $4 to fix it in the future. Another study said that if a necessary repair is deferred and allowed to remain in service until the next level of failure, the resultant expense will be 30 times the early intervention cost. Let me give you an example. I worked with a church down in coastal South Carolina that was having problems with their windows. And the building was 10 years old. I asked them how often did they recaulk and repaint the windows? And they looked at me like I had two heads. They said they had never done any maintenance on their windows. So we did a real quick study to see that they needed to spend maybe about $600 a year in touch-up paint and recaulking windows. By the way, if you go to Lowe's, your caulk is good for 1 year in most cases, as far as the warranty on it. This church did nothing on that. Where does water go when you have cracks on the outside of your window? Yes, they go inside the wall. They get into your insulation. They get into your studs. They get into your drywall. And that next level of failure, as described in this sentence, is when you start seeing that black stuff coming out on the drywall. Now, all of a sudden, instead of spending $400 to $500 to $600 to recaulk your windows, you're spending 10, 20, even more thousands of dollars to rip out drywall, to remediate mold, to replace insulation, and so on and so forth. These are the real issues of deferred maintenance. The pictures I have on the screen right now are all pictures from churches that we have done assessments for. These are examples of deferred maintenance. That bottom left-hand picture, what's going to happen over time if that continues? Well, that water is going to undermine footings and sidewalks and eventually just destroy it. Just for giggles and grins, that bottom left-hand picture, that's a church that had the wisdom or foolishness to buy a mall, decided they didn't need a couple air conditioning units, and so they ran roofing over top of it.
Hey, Tim, are you able to bring the slides full screen so we can see a little better?
I am full screen. I am full screen on my screen.
Interesting. Never mind.
Okay. As we do facility condition assessments, we are constantly evaluating churches' deferred maintenance. On average, with over, I guess last year, it was close to 5 or 6 million square feet of facilities that we assessed. we found on average $25 to $40 a square foot in deferred maintenance. Again, think through how many square feet do you have, multiply it for somewhere between $25 and $40. That's probably the amount of deferred maintenance you have. And then ask yourself, do you have the funds available to address that today?
Hey, Tim, we are getting a couple other people share that they aren't seeing full screen. Is there anything that you can press play on or anything like that?
Yeah.
How about use slideshow?
Tim, yeah, use slideshow because we're seeing your next slides on the bottom. That's better. And then go to slideshow and choose start or
that's what I have here. Yeah, are you able to see the slides better now?
This works. Yeah, go for it.
I'll just use this and not use what PowerPoint wants me to use.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. So there were two additional studies done in public schools. The NEA, the Union of Teachers, they did a study a few years ago that found that the public school systems had $322 billion of deferred maintenance. Then the U.S. Green Building Council Center for Green Schools came back and said to modernize schools and bring them up to current standards, $542 billion. So the question is, why does that matter for churches? Well, the first thing is there's only 98,000 public schools in America, and there's over 350,000 churches in America. Yeah, many times schools are bigger than churches, but not always. We work with churches that have over 1 million square feet. And by the sounds of Jim's facility with a 9-story parking deck, that's pretty significant. That's a lot of square footage. The difference here is schools are entitled for government money and for taxation benefits. Churches aren't. We've been entrusted with this. We can't. You can't raise your dues to your church to get more money. So that's the second bucket, is deferred maintenance. The third bucket is capital reserves or life cycle planning. And life cycle planning is not an if question, it's a when and how much. It's inevitable. You're going to replace every stitch of carpet. You're going to replace every roof, every air conditioning unit. You may not replace footings, but nearly every component of your building is going to be replaced or significantly altered during its lifetime. So I like to think of a capital reserve program as kind of like a 401k. You don't put money in a 401k to spend it that same year. You put it in there systematically over time so that when you do need it, the money is there. That's what really proactive and intentional facility capital reserve planning is. So there's 3 facts I want to look at real quick. Number 1, all buildings deteriorate, and they deteriorate at a rate of 1 to 4%. These are numbers that we got from IFMA. These are not our numbers. These are their numbers. Fact number 2, as such, nearly every physical component of your facility will be replaced or have a major overhaul. That's just a fact. And the third piece of this is that all of those replacements and enhancements are going to require dollars. It's not the hope of dollars. It's not the wish of dollars. It's not the pledge of dollars. It's dollars. And whether or not that's dollars that you are purposely setting aside from tithes and offerings, or it's intentional money you are earmarking as part of an endowment, it is real dollars that are necessary. Again, these are inevitable. These are not maybe costs. And here's a little bonus fact. If you do not keep up with the natural rate of deterioration, the rate can grow exponentially. We've already looked at that as to how, whether it's $1 to $4 or 30 times the cost at the next failure, it can grow exponentially. So what is a life cycle? Life cycle, most of us enjoy the planning and the design, maybe even the construction of a building, but it also then goes back into the facility management of it. The facility management is a key component. And let me show how that kind of lays out. My guess, particularly if Jim is representative of many of you, you've got older buildings, so some of this isn't going to apply. But if we tie this back to human growth, during the prenatal stage, that's when you're building something. During childhood, this green bar represents your routine maintenance. And so for the first period of that, you don't have a lot of capital renewals or need to replace things. You start getting into that middle and second half of that 16 years, there's many things that you are already starting to replace in that first 16 years. The average life cycle of a direct expansion HVAC unit, whether that is a rooftop unit or a heat pump or some type of a split furnace and air conditioning unit, other than a chiller and boiler, 15 years is about the normal time. So you are likely in that first childhood stage already going to be replacing units. You may be replacing carpet during that period of time. You move into the third stage, this adolescence, and you still have that routine maintenance you've got to do. You still got that $5.5 to $7 a square foot annually that you need just to keep up your routine maintenance and operations. But you notice how much more your capital renewals has grown, because you think about some of those HVAC units that you replaced in that first, the stage 2, you may be replacing them a second time here. You move into older buildings, you still have the routine maintenance, your capital renewals has grown, but now you're talking about adaptations and upgrades, moving from T8 fluorescents to LEDs and other things like that fall into that yellow category. Then you start the cycle kind of all over again. What happens too often with churches particularly is that we try to extend the life of our assets forever. We keep trying to duct tape and bubble gum things and make them work because we haven't properly planned for those capital renewals. And in many cases, not only is there high costs of maintaining it, but if I keep a 25-year-old air conditioning running, yes, I've got bubble gummed it, I've saved myself maybe $100,000 from replacing it, but I'm probably costing myself 20, 30, 40% more in operational costs because it is a less efficient heating and air conditioning unit. So real quick example that we did for a national magazine a few years ago, looking at what is the real cost of owning a building. So we did this analysis. So you build a new building. For this example, it was $4.6 million, more or less. We then made the assumption that the church would borrow $300,000 or $3 million of the 4.6, do a 15-year amortization, 6% interest. I wish I could get 6% today. Pay it off in 7 years. So my cost of money, my interest was going to be $1.1 million. Using the numbers that we had earlier, I now have somewhere between $525 and $750 a square foot just in my operational costs. See how all that adds up together there? If I take my operational costs, I add capital reserves, which I'm showing here is $1 to $3. It's actually closer to $2 to $3 annually. If I use an assumption of $7 for all of that, that's $210,000 annually for a 30,000 square foot building. If we then extrapolate that over a 40-year life cycle, and we use 40 years because that's kind of the benchmark that most facility management assessments look at, is a 40-year benchmark, and we assume only 1.5% annual inflation. That shakes out to be initial cost of 4.6, cost of money at 1.1, and our operations costs over 40 years is over $13 million. And too often we get all hung up on what does it cost to build a building versus what does it cost to operate a building. So my total cost of operation is $19 million over a 40-year period of time. When we look at that in the pie chart, 71% of my cost of ownership is an operational cost. That only leaves 29% that was in the cost of design and construction and my cost of money. After we released this, we were contacted by the folks at State Farm Insurance. They had just done a similar assessment for all of their facilities that they owned across the company. Their determination was 80% of the cost of ownership over their 40 to 50 years was operations. And then I found a book from 1965 that said it was 85%. Now, both of those included insurance. Ours did not. My guess is if we included insurance in ours, it would have been pushing the 80% for operations. Irrelevant what these percentages are, that's a big number. So when you then start thinking about how do you plan for the proper renewals, we start looking at capital reserves. And what is a capital reserve? It's an amount of money that a company or organization keeps in a special account for future needs. Let's kind of drill that down. Number one, it's money, it's dollars, it's greenback, it's currency. It's in a special account, or at least a designated account. So it's not commingled with other funds and hope we don't spend it kind of thing. And it's for the future. It's for down the road. It's not for right now. If it is something that needs done today, that's a general maintenance issue. Capital reserves are that planning for long term. It is not a rainy day fund. It is not your pastor's slush fund. It's not your youth minister's field trip fund or whatever. And when you're looking at these costs, you've got to factor your deterioration rate on your current replacement cost. So that 1 to 4% of natural rate of deterioration is on what it would cost to rebuild it today, not what it cost you in 1898. So understanding your current replacement value. Now, most of you, I'm sure, already know what this is because your insurance company has probably put it on your insurance policy. So then the question is, how much is enough for capital reserves? If you're not willing to do a full line item by line item, which is our recommended process for capital reserve planning, we have found that $2 to $3 per square foot annually. This is not a one and done. This is $2 to $3 per square foot that you put into an account annually, preferably into an account that has the opportunity to grow, some kind of a conservative investment account so that it will grow. Plus what you need to address deferred maintenance. What we find happening is people then start a capital reserve fund. They have not taken care of deferred maintenance and they start robbing Peter to pay Paul. So they take money out of their capital reserves to take care of deferred maintenance. And then when something breaks, they don't have the money, or something needs to be replaced because it's the end of life. They just don't have the money to do it. That's a real problem. So we suggest a couple of things. Use a tool of some sort. We've got a tool that's part of our East-based software, but even if you just used a spreadsheet or did something, this is something you really need to try to get your arms around. So then one of the other questions we are asked regularly is, how do I prioritize this? Where do I start? Your largest line items are almost always HVAC, roofing, and asphalt. Now, for many of you, you may also have slate roofs. Well, that would fall into roofing. You may have stained glass, and you may have millions of dollars of stained glass. That's a very large item that needs to be addressed. Operational impact is the next thing to consider. HVAC again, see a pattern between that and the largest line items? What would happen if you had a 100-ton chiller go out and you couldn't get that for 8 months? How would that impact your ministry and the ability to operate as a church? Then think through your building envelope. Your windows, caulk, doors, insulation, air and water intrusion. These would be next things to tackle, as well as then lighting and electrical. Then think through your visual impact. Think about those first-time guests as well as your community as they drive by your facility or they visit it for other functions. What's the condition of your parking and site concrete? What do your floor finishes look like? Or do they look like 1960 floor finishes? Do you have asbestos tile on the floors? Do you have stains from coffee and other things? Same thing with wall finishes. Does the building look dingy and nicks on the walls? And then your overall lighting. Lighting can cover a multitude of sins and make facilities seem more welcoming. Another free resource that we have on our website, which is smartchurchsolutions.com, you go to resources, is 5 intentional steps for establishing a capital reserve account. Again, another great resource. So we've covered 3 buckets. We've covered your operational cost, deferred maintenance, and we've covered your capital reserves. The 4th bucket that you look at when you're budgeting is capital projects. This is different than capital reserves. I'm doing a renovation. I'm doing an addition, new construction, or I'm repurposing part of my building. Or let's say it's a major readaptation. We're going to add an elevator, or we're going to add some other handicap accessibility that wasn't there before. Think of it this way. Capital renewals, capital reserves is I'm replacing kind of a 1-for-1. I have an air conditioning unit now. I'm replacing it with an air conditioning unit. Adaptations and capital projects may be, I don't have an elevator today, but I'm putting in an elevator. That would fall under capital projects. So with the 4 buckets, there is a best case scenario. Best case scenario is that there's only 3 buckets. And I think it's probably pretty obvious which bucket is missing, and it's that deferred maintenance bucket. In a perfect world, we would properly fund all of our general maintenance, our staffing, our janitorial. We would have all that properly going so that the building operates the way it was intended to operate without allowing deferred maintenance to happen. Then we would have enough money in our capital reserve account so that when something reaches end of life, we've got the money to replace it, and you start a new cycle of capital reserves. In that case, we would have no deferred maintenance. Now, I realize we don't live in a perfect world, but that would be the ideal scenario. So with that, I'm going to shut up, and Lee, let me know if there's some questions we need to address.
I don't know if I see any questions so far. Jim, do you see any?
No, no, there's no questions. I just do want to remind folks on the call that the recording of this webinar, as well as all these slides, will be made available in about a couple of days from now. You'll receive a link from them if you've registered for this webinar that they're available, and you can go and take a look, re-listen, and see the slides, things like that. So this is all being recorded and will be made available to you. One of the questions is, where do we get ebooks? Tim, I think you said you go to smartchurchsolutions.com and go to resource. Is that correct?
That's correct. And then there's ebooks. We've got checklists for preventive maintenance and emergency preparedness. They're all free tools for you to download.
And I just want to add to this conversation, because it can be seem daunting if you don't have a capital fund or capital projects, or even a deferred maintenance fund to help catch up on the deferred maintenance. It can seem a daunting task for big church or small churches. But I think that your vestry and your staff can think of creative ways to come up with money for those. For example, and I know St. David's downtown is a little bit maybe even an exception, but we have a parking garage. We own it, but we don't operate it. So we have somebody, Metropolis, manage it for us. We get a percentage of all the revenues. We get a higher percentage, 65%, over and above what they budget every year for income. So if we make $10,000 more, we get 65% of that over and above what they had budgeted. That money is what we put into future capital, part for the garage and part for the parish. You may not have a garage, but you have buildings and space that you may be able to capitalize on for outside of your church. For example, not only the garage, but we rent out a lot of our facilities for a myriad of things. South by Southwest, which is a 2-week music thing here in Austin. We do it. We have several citywide events happening at our church, and we charge for that. So that's how we can get money back into the church to help maintain it. It's not all on the givers of the parishioners of the church to fund all these things. That's kind of my point. I may be rambling, sorry. But when you think about these trying to create these big buckets of money for future projects or to correct deferred maintenance, don't always think that it has to come out of the offertory collection. It does not. And most of our buildings are vacant during the day, and many times the weeks, evenings during the week as well. So that's just my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, good input, Jim. We're finding more and more churches having to think through how do you fund your ministry outside of normal offertory offerings.
Let's see if there's any other if you do have a question, just pop it in the chat. We can I'll read it off to Lee and Tim, and if not, that's okay too. We'll give people a few seconds here. Lee or Nathan, even, do either of you have any comments about what Tim talked about? Any other additions that you might want to add? Oh, here, Zach asked, what's the best way to get your total square footage?
Yeah, so square footage is best calculated using exterior dimensions of your building. So you can either measure it. You should be able to go on tax records and see what they've got there. If you've got floor plans, you can look at those and measure off of floor plans. But make sure that you use the exterior dimensions of a building.
And if you don't want to walk around your building with a tape measure, you can go on Google Earth and you can use their measuring tool and just measure your buildings through the satellite image. Yeah, it's a quick and easy way.
Yeah, it was interesting, Jim. A few years ago, we did an assessment for Christ Church Cathedral, downtown Indianapolis. And when we looked at their insurance documents, the insurance company had done an aerial of their property and had significantly missed the fact that it was a 4-story building, and by only doing an aerial. And so they were grossly underinsured because they didn't have all the square footage that was necessary.
That's a good point. Yeah, if you're doing aerial, like I said, be sure to multiply it by the number of stories you have.
Yep.
Another question was, somebody asked, I would be interested in hearing about different ways churches rent out their space.
Yeah,
so like I said, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, there's a whole myriad, and it is very, very site and case specific. You know, in Jim's case, being in his location with that kind of a parking deck, he's got great opportunity for that. The thing to think about is what does your community around you not have that you can make your facility available for? And if you can then find organizations that would partner with you all, where you're not running the events or the use of the building, you become a landlord. Kind of like what Jim described, they get a percentage of profits off of things. So I think I would first start with, are there needs in our community that we can fulfill by having our facility used during the week?
Yeah, another option, when I actually worked for a church in a suburb of Minneapolis, it was first string suburb, and our school was merged with 5 other schools. It was a Catholic school, elementary school. It was merged with 5 other schools in the area. So we had this empty school building. And so we actually rented it out to the Minneapolis Public School for a Montessori school that they needed a space for. And they wanted it outside the district, which we were like 1 block from the district boundaries, because then they wouldn't have to, they got away with not having like their own union janitors and all that kind of stuff, a higher cost. But so we rented it by per square foot and was able to utilize that space that would have normally just sat empty all week long. But it doesn't have to be anything grandiose as that. It can be as simple as renting it out to, you know, depending on what you have, renting it, you know, like Tim said, just look around your community and see, you know, places that you could partner with, whether it be social services or nonprofits or schools or even public schools. They're all depending on where you are, could be clamoring for space and be happy to rent space from you.
Yep.
Couple questions. Let's see. Trinity in DC rents a daycare. We also rent our kitchen and parish hall for events. That's true. And there's more and more push for renting out. If you have a commercial kitchen, you can rent out that commercial kitchen during the day to caterers and other people who need a place to make the meals that they cater, but they don't have a standing kitchen. That's another way that could just make sure you capture the utility costs if you're going to rent out something like that. Somebody asked, could you repeat the landscaping budget? The $6,000 per developed acre includes buildings with outside landscaping or just only landscaping?
Yeah, great question. So it's anything that's developed. So let's say I have a 10-acre site and I've got a 40,000 square foot building. Well, that's 1 acre. I've got 2 or 3 acres of parking, and then I've got 2 or 3 acres of grass and landscaped area. All of that is included in the developed acreage.
Okay. Let's see. Somebody wrote, oh, that's just to me. I'm getting feedback. Let's see when I talk. Since the church is a nonprofit, is there any problem with the monies made from rentals?
Yeah, so you need to talk to your CPA and your attorney about that. Some of it boils down to there's a there is a tax that you will likely have to pay on the profit of it, but you also if you have things that are, say, ancillary of your overall ministry, those are generally not considered to be rent or profit. So let's say that you wanted to have someone come in and do a coffee shop in your building, and they were going to open 6-7 days a week, but it was also the coffee shop for the church on Sunday. Now that's an ancillary use of your building. Now, Jim, I don't know how you guys do it. Do you guys pay tax on your portion of the parking lot rent?
No, we do not right now. It's called unrelated business taxes.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, currently we do not pay property tax on our garage because, as you said, it's primarily for the church's use, especially Sundays and Wednesdays and during the week. Most downtown churches here in Austin have a garage, and so the city and actually the state is kind of hands off of, they're not going to, poke that hornet's nest and try to tax us. So right now, but we are recognizing the fact that we could have to pay taxes at some point, and even back taxes if they come after us. So we are trying to build up a fund if that were to happen, and using some of that tax, that profit off the garage as well.
Yeah, I know there's the church that I worked here in Charlotte that's a downtown church, has a large surface parking area. And they have a similar arrangement with what you have, Jim. They don't pay property tax, but they do pay an income tax on their profit. Yeah.
In this case, in our case, the metropolis is the one receiving the money, so they pay the sales tax off the parking, contract parkers and things like that.
Got it.
Another quick question is, how does church property rental affect your insurance? I could say for our insurance, it does not affect us. We people who rent our property, we ask them to have insurance and to include us as a certificate holder on their insurance policy if they rent from us.
Yeah, you need to
have
on
an ongoing basis. Yeah,
you need to be listed as additional insured and a policyholder on both of that.
Somebody else asked, how is renting out space not a profit for nonprofit?
Yeah, so if you're renting out to a nonprofit, there's a couple of ways that you could consider. One is it rent or is it a donation? Is it a fixed donation from one nonprofit to another? Again, I'm not a CPA, so I strongly recommend you talk to your church's CPA on the legality of that for your particular location.
Yeah, and somebody also asked, I was going to bring this point up, is that you should, if you do contracts or agreements with folks to use your space, do not call it rent, do not call it leasing. You use the use of space fee, which is what Tim was getting at. We should do that for our own entities. We have Trinity Center, which is a resource center for the homeless here. They're a separate 501c3 under our umbrella, and same with our day school. We have agreements with them on use of the building, that type of thing, and it all is use of space, not a rent or a lease, because you can get into problems if you use that terminology.
Yeah, great point, Jim.
Check with your diocese as well. They usually have somebody in their office that will help you craft those agreements, or even sometimes your insurance company will help you craft them as well, or your chancellor. Do you require a certificate of liability for groups who rent? We do. What's your experience, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely. I would suggest that they sign an actual agreement that spells out the terms and conditions of your use policy, and then get a certificate of insurance from them with you being listed as additional insured.
Great. Just scanning through the chat here, make sure I didn't miss anybody's question. I know there's one, and this is right up your alley, Tim. Interested in software for tracking maintenance.
Yeah. So if you go to church, Smart Church Solutions, click on software, you'll find a link to the eSpace. There are other options out there. We're just pretty biased on our own because ours was designed for churches. Most others are designed for large commercial entities and not the church world. So we took that into account as we built ours out. But if you need further help with that, we can happy to set up a demo and show you what it can and can't do.
Thank you very much. Another question just popped in. Do you need the certificate of liability to someone that uses our facility for only one event, like a garden club meeting?
Everything has risk and liability. And so that is a choice that your vestry is going to have to make as to whether or not the bridge club or the garden club that only uses it one time has possibility. Anybody can be walking down your sidewalk and trip and fall and break a leg, or someone accidentally breaks something in your facility. As well-meaning as they may be, man, you've really got to protect the church as a whole.
Yeah, the follow-up question is from the same person. What about church members renting it? My thing is, church members renting is the same as an outside person renting it. The other thing I was going to say about the facilities of one-time events is I would check with your insurance company as well to see what level they would like to have. I know that in some churches where I worked, even for like wedding receptions and that, we make them pull liability. And usually they do it under their homeowner's insurance. It doesn't really cost them anything. But here's the reason why. Grandma gets up to do a line dance, trips, falls, breaks a hip. Guess who's getting sued? It's the church, not the people who are having the wedding. So you need to make sure you protect yourself. It can and does happen. And like Tim said, it just depends on what your level of exposure you're comfortable with, what risk you're comfortable. But I would certainly talk with your vestry, talk with your insurance company. You should have insurance to cover people who trip and fall in your facility. But if you don't have to take the brunt of that, it's far better if for your insurance to be secondary and let somebody's policy who's doing it to do it. Now, things like bridge clubs and that, again, the risk is low that somebody's going to trip and fall, but they could. But that's a decision you're probably going to have to make as a church.
Yeah, the other piece with that, Jim, and I don't know how you all do this, but churches still, in many cases, particularly smaller to mid-size, use volunteer labor to do different things. You ask a group to come in and clean the building or to make repairs. Think about where did that fall in that workers' comp, and how do you protect the church from a potential workers' comp claim?
Right. I don't see any other questions. We'll just wait a few seconds to see if somebody's typing one in. Those are all very good questions and things that every church deals with. Yeah, it's some churches grapple with, do we even rent out our space, to staff, not just church members, but if you rent it out to staff, do you require them to have liability? Short answer, in my opinion, would be yes. You require it across the board for anybody, because if a staff member trips and falls or a family member does, they can sue you just as fast as anybody else. Let's see. Somebody wrote, for groups that regularly meet at your facility, would you do an annual contract to reestablish terms?
That's an interesting thought. I think it depends on, is it the same room, the same number of hours, time in and time again, or does it fluctuate? If it fluctuates, you really need to do it. If you're going to do an annual contract, it needs to have terms in there that allow you to fluctuate the fees and whatnot. Most of the time, your insurance liability certificates, your COIs that you get, are good for a year, or at least until the next expiration date. So if they're in mid-year of their insurance policy and they get you a COI, then you're only getting 6 months worth of coverage. So number one, you need to make sure you have a process and a policy for tracking all COIs for people not just renting, but all of your vendors. You should not allow a vendor to come in and do any repairs in your building, whether it's cleaning or replacing air conditioning units, without a COI on file. You just continue to put your church at risk in a litigious, society that we live
in. Nathan commented, connect with your accountant and legal, but if you are renting out to the public, you also have to consider fair market rate. It can cause issues if you charge too low. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Another question, do you consider a wedding or funeral a rental? I could say for St. David's, the wedding ceremony is not a rental. The funeral itself is not a rental. If they have a reception for the wedding afterwards, we charge for that. We do funeral receptions as part of the funeral service, as part of our ministry. So that's not considered a rental, but wedding receptions are considered rentals.
So Jim, how do you handle that if it's a wedding for someone that is not a parishioner?
We don't do weddings for people who are not parishioners. Okay. Typically, they have to have a connection to us.
Got it. Okay.
But if we were, we would charge them for the church.
Got it.
And for the usage. Yeah.
So at that point in time, it does become a usage fee if you did like to go that way.
Yes. These are great questions.
This is the kind of nuts and bolts that parish administrators have to live with.
That's right.
I'm going to confess, part of my presentation is theory, and it's meant to scare the snot out of people a little bit, because it is real, and I have seen way too many churches just. Particularly during COVID, Jim, we saw a lot of churches that ended up having to shut their doors totally because they didn't have the money to keep, maintaining a building that was 120 years old with a congregation that wasn't attending anymore because they had to shut their doors. And so it becomes a significant problem if we're not addressing those things. But things about rental, these are the types of things that happen every day for your church.
Last question, then we'll take a break before the next presentation. We have a community garden which non-members use. How to see if we should ask for CIOs from them? Oh, I think they're saying, how do we ask, or should we ask for certificate of insurances from them?
Yeah, so in a community garden center, they are still on your property. You, as the church, are still liable. Again, what's your comfort level with that liability? In a community garden, there's actually, in many cases, more risk because they're using tools with sharp objects on them. And so you probably need to be even more vigilant out there. So, what if you have a community garden, do you currently ask them to sign some kind of a agreement that they can use that plot for their community garden? And if so, then a COI should probably, or some type of liability coverage probably should be a part of that agreement as well.
Yeah, this is true for all these type rental things, but you should have a written agreement with whoever's renting them. And in there, you should have a hold harmless clause, an indemnity clause. Now, we as a church won't sign one if they're trying to make us hold them harmless, but you should require it to those people signing or using your facilities or a garden, things like that. What that means, if you're not familiar, hold harmless means that if something were to happen, whatever it is, that they agree that they will not come back to you and sue you. Basically, it doesn't mean they can't, But if you walk into a courtroom with that signed, it can lessen your exposure. Again, as a church, we always ask to have that taken out because we don't want to hold anybody harmless, but we ask other people to hold us harmless. So it's kind of a routine thing to do, but that's something to do. Anybody you're renting to, you should have some type of agreement. So you have what they can and can't do, and also the hold harmless and indemnity clause should be in there. Again, your chancellor or diocesan attorneys, or if you have a church attorney that deals with real estate especially, can help you out with any of that. Question, how does the certificate of insurance work with Boy Scouts? Same thing, they have one. The Boy Scouts have it. They're used to giving it to you. There should not be a problem. Same with Girl Scouts.
Yep.
They have insurance, a lot of it. Okay. Let's thank you, Tim, very much for your presentation. At this point, I think we're going to take a 5-minute break. So you're welcome to stay on. You're welcome to, just listen if you want, or grab a coffee, or grab a quick bathroom break, and then we'll come back on in 5 minutes. So hope to see you all back again in 5 minutes, and I have the timer running.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jim.
Yep. Okay, I have 5 o'clock according to my timer. We'll give folks a few more seconds to make sure they're back on. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I thank you very much to Tim Kuhl for our last presentation, 4 buckets of church facility budgeting. And now we're going to hear from Nathan Parr, who's going to talk to us about, how to deal with those buckets and to come up with a preventive maintenance plan for our buildings, which I think that is something that we all can certainly benefit from. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan. And Nathan, why don't you introduce yourself, and thanks for being here.
All right. Thank you for having me. Appreciate everyone that's on the call. So I talk a lot with my hands, which does not work at all for Zoom, and I usually wander. So I can't do that in this session either. So I'm going to try to keep you engaged. We're going to have a little fun. I hope you ask questions via the chat. So again, my name is Nathan Parr. I'm a facility stewardship specialist with Smart Church Solutions. And what does that mean? It means I go around and look at buildings. I do that a lot. And I also help develop maintenance plans. I help develop custodial plans. I do trainings for the churches that we've served. I've been with the company since 2017 doing this. In that time, I've personally evaluated over 6 million square feet of sacred space across the country, 26 different states. I also compiled it and did the data stuff for our first benchmark survey, which we're doing that again. If you haven't seen the emails that come out or the links, if you'd like to participate in our updated benchmark survey, we'd love to get your information on that. How's that for a shameless plug? All right, so ground rules through this presentation. These next 2 that I get to do with y'all, they kind of tie in with each other. The first one's really, really short. The second one's kind of longer. So we'll do that, but you're going to get the recording. You'll get my handout. You'll kind of see how they tie together. And I love kind of just showing you when we talk about establishing a preventative maintenance plan, I want to show you the areas that we need to focus on. A lot of these areas are the areas that I've observed over the years throughout the many states and with the many different churches of deficiencies. And this is where you're going to be spending the money. So this is where we need to spend some money maintaining it. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here in just a second. I say just a second because I want to make sure I get everything correct as to seeing my Zoom while I do this. So there we go. Gotta love it. So share the right screen, Nathan. All right, and let's do that. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen now. And it does all right. And
yeah, we can, Nathan. Thank you. Right. It looks good.
Great. I'll move this little thingy over there. So again, I'm going to throw the chat box up so I see it. Throw me your chats. I love it. I love participation. There go my hands again. Sorry about that. I love participation. Ask me your questions. And if you don't, I'm just going to start telling bad jokes. It's going to get worse and it'll be recorded for posterity. So let's get going. So when we talk about a preventative maintenance plan, well, how does preventative maintenance impact the other areas? Because it does. Everything ties together. We should never look at these things as individual pockets or individual things. It all comes together in our facilities. So initial impression and the impact of preventative maintenance, it's a big deal. A lot of research shows first 7 seconds, somewhere within that time frame, people are forming an opinion of who you are based on what they've experienced, be it in the parking lot, wayfinding, or the initial walk into your facility. So that's a fresh eyes or first time guest experience. A lot of times we know which door to enter because it doesn't squeak, or we know which restroom to use because it smells better. Well, that's an issue because our first time guests don't necessarily know that. So we need to address those. Is it easy to find your facility? You know your city. A lot of times, again, I'm traveling to places I've never traveled to. One of the things I love to do is I try to stay about 4 to 5 miles away from the facility. So I have to use common route guidance software to get there. Does it tell me where to go? Does it get there? What does this have to do with preventative or setting up a plan? because maintaining your wayfinding, maintaining your landscaping, maintaining that contributes to how easy it is to find your building, how easy it is to get there. Does the interior signage take, and I'm not going to read through everything because you're going to get a copy, but all of this ties in. And if we're deficient in any of those areas, that creates an unwelcoming environment. Many times we say this is who we are as a facility, as a church, but the question I always like to ask is, does your facility actually match who you say you are? And we get that deferred maintenance, and we need to understand this preventative plan maintenance and get this plan going, because a lot of these issues are directly related to those things Tim's already mentioned, and I'm going to drive home in the next couple of sessions of staffing, budget, and deferred maintenance. All right, everybody still here and everybody awake? Hopefully you are. So one of the first areas I want to talk about when we talk about developing this plan, and so this plan and how to create this maintenance plan starts with, in my opinion, one of the most important things that needs to occur, and that's the walkabout or the walk around. You need to walk around your facility. You need to look at things. That's the only way you're going to determine the condition of your facility and what needs to be addressed and how to go about that. So when we talk about the perimeter, it's also important to know where your perimeter is for those unfortunate times we need to look at issuing a criminal trespass or something to that effect. We need to know where our property line is. So we need to look at the property line condition. Can we see it? Can we address it? Is it safe and maintained? One of the big three, Tim's already mentioned, parking lots. When's the last time you've walked through your parking lot? Not driven it, but walked through. You see a lot more as you walk through these parking lots. Wayfinding and visibility and signage. This is obviously how you're telling people to approach your facility. It's telling them where to go. So if we're not maintaining those, if we don't have those on a regular cycle to repaint, refresh, or to check to make sure they're still accurate. If we rename a building, we may have to rename some signs. Is the route of travel well marked? And I'm not just talking about for vehicles, I'm talking about foot traffic as well. Do you have the proper pathways and areas of caution marked out? Accessibility. So is your facility accessible to those with mobility issues? It's not just wheelchairs, it could be those in walkers, those with impaired sight, those who are hard of hearing. Raise your hand if virtually, I guess. Yeah, you can do that. Raise your hand if that speaks to anybody that comes into your facility, hard of hearing, mobility issues, hard to see, or not hard to see that they can't see, but you know what I mean. So we have to consistently review and check out those areas to make sure we're actually maintaining them. Conditions of all the hardscape and curbs and concrete. And so this is the non-sidewalk areas. Why is that important? Well, again, if they're not maintained, if they start to break down, it can create a trip hazard, it can create a water issue, and it looks unsightly. And all of this stuff, everything that you put onto your facility has a life cycle. So if it has a life cycle, it has some type of maintenance that needs to be performed to extend the life of the actual product. Site drainage is a huge one, except in Texas right now. For many of you, I know lots of Texas, we're not worried about site drainage. We're worried about site burning up or just drying up. So make sure you're watering around your foundations for those of us we've been 100+ degrees for the last 60 days or whatever. Site lighting. Many times we're at our building during the light of day. It's good to take a walk at night. The only way we can make sure that we're checking those lights and make sure they're working is if we're actually seeing them lit during the time of day. And that also can alert you if a light is going out before it goes out, if it starts to dim, or identify those areas that are potential safety issues, like your dumpsters, for example. I see this a lot. We put our dumpsters away from the building, obviously for obvious reasons. But at night when we're cleaning, our cleaning staff, who there may only be 1 or 2 people there cleaning, they've got to haul this trash across this dark parking lot to this dark enclosed area that's a dumpster, and that's a potential safety concern. But also maintaining the area around the dumpster is important to make sure that nobody's hanging out in the dumpsters it shouldn't be, and that it doesn't look unsightly for anything like that. And then of course landscaping. So pretty much this is a generic list, and these are the things that we need to do. And I'm about to show some pictures because hey, pictures are great, right? And we'll talk about then the types of maintenance that should have occurred to do these, and as you think through this and develop this. So again, any questions, throw them out there. So here are examples of people who did not do the planned maintenance, who did not develop an exterior maintenance plan. And so you see, I think you can see my little arrow there. The sign here, it's just been hit by landscaping maintenance and stuff, and it's hard to see. And as that starts to fade, and as that chips more, and as it starts to get overgrown, this is the only identifier for this particular place as to where to turn to actually enter their facility. So if they're not maintaining this and maintaining the area around it, it can make it difficult for someone to find them. Here's an example of the broken curbs and the things on this entrance. Common thing that we see, organic debris and some effluents, some water. In essence, we've got some drainage issues, we've got some water coming through here. Well, as that continues to deteriorate, this break is along a main pathway in this particular instance. As that mortar and as that water gets in there and that mortar starts to deteriorate, this can start to crumble. We start to get push out here. It becomes an issue. And again, it's along a main pathway. Planned maintenance would say we're out there cleaning that brick. And if we see continual water coming through, we're going to start to look at the area behind it to see if we've got an issue here that we can alleviate through better drainage project. Make sense? I hope, yeah, I'm really good about back and forth, but it's hard in Zoom. But hey, we're here, we'll do it. Here we see a big thing, one of the big three, remember, asphalt. So what do we call this? We call this alligatoring. Because it looks like an alligator. So why does that happen? Well, asphalt is made up of many different components. Those components is a liquid. As that liquid dries, as it goes down, the aggregate crumbles, because that's what it is. It's aggregate. So it simply has a couple things. It hasn't been sealed as often as it should. So then water has gotten in there. They've had some freeze and thawing cycles, which has cracked the asphalt. And then it's gotten into the subbase a little bit. Proper maintenance would say, let's put our planned resealing of our parking lots more often. Quick question, yellow stripe on our outside step is faded almost entirely. If you're just doing a one-off, every home improvement store, every paint store will have some sort of industrial paint for the marking paint for asphalt or concrete. Just make sure you ask them. That's what they're there. They're the coatings experts. Ask them for the correct paint for asphalt or concrete, depending on what you're painting it on, and just do the proper surface prep, which is listed on the can. So in addition to working with Smart Church Solutions, I didn't share this. I was also, I've worked commercial construction. I've owned my own construction company. I've done commercial roofing, commercial landscaping. I was an operations director for 12 and a half years. And I have my master's in theology, and I have a master's in business. And so when I'm telling you I've done a lot of this painting and stuff, I've actually had to do that. But yeah, you can repaint it and just do the proper surface prep. Prep is everything. So yeah, and everybody's answering those questions, but yes, you can get it. And I would recommend getting a small amount, and quite frankly, just from ease of use and cleanup, most of these traffic marking paints, they don't last as long if you get a water-based. Some of them are, the new formulations are better, but as we talk about environmental impact, anything that's lower VOC, water-based, I'd encourage you to just pay attention to that, especially if you're doing small painting and touch-up around your facility. It's just safer. So here's a pothole that is formed to the right here. I'll come back to the little guy in the center. Again, it's resealing. This is maintenance. It's not addressing a small hole before it gets to be a big hole. That's a cold patch. Here we have dirt on this lower left that has flown over and covered the sidewalk. Obviously, this retaining area needs something to hold the dirt down. Again, we're talking maintenance. We see it, plant some bushes, build a bigger retaining wall, anything to hold that dirt in. Here we have a broken cover on a water valve. in the ground. If we're walking and looking, this is that planned and preventative maintenance plan as we go on our grounds, and we have our checklist. And here we have something we know didn't occur overnight. It's bushes growing into a building. Trim this. Anytime your landscaping is touching your building, we don't want that. We like it to keep separation there. And so the issue here, people ask, well, what's the issue here from a maintenance standpoint? Well, a couple issues. One, from an accessibility. Anybody know the issue? For the most part, yes, and Debbie has a great point. Native plants are great at holding soil and preventing erosion. Absolutely. Get with your local deal to agriculture thing to do drought tolerant plants. But on this ramp from this was an add-on. And so they saw a problem, they solved it. But from a maintenance issue, it's interesting. Yeah, need rails. We don't actually need rails because of it's only one step, but it's not a contrasting color. It doesn't have a contrasting texture. Remember, it's not just for mobility challenged, it's for seeing visually challenged individuals too. That's that contrasting texture that you see on ramps. And the contrasting color, again, to alert that this is a grade change. It's also in a parking lot. It's not really well marked. They didn't really do a good job of taking away the parking stripes, and then it's got some asphalt issues there. So this is this project that was done. It's a great project. I'm glad they did it, but yeah, trip hazard, absolutely. And it is. The rails while the rails are not required because of the height here, I would agree with Paige that rails would be nice because it also addresses the trip hazard function. So they're not coming at a cross section. If they wanted to have cross section, you'd have to do a cross slope, blah, blah, blah. We won't go there, right? So those are just common things that we're looking for. We're talking about developing this maintenance plan. These are maintenance issues. And so this is what has to be addressed. All of these things, if they had been addressed years earlier, because none of these occurred within, well, with the exception, maybe the broken lid on the bottom middle. None of these happened overnight. These happened over time, okay? So the next thing that we're gonna look at is exterior walls. So again, we walked around the perimeter and that, so what are we gonna look for when we're developing our preventative maintenance plan on our exterior walls? We're gonna look at the walls, wall surface condition, right? We're gonna look at mortar joints if you've got masonry. We're going to look at the staining patterns. There is some staining that is natural and naturally occurring depending on your facade and depending on your area. And sometimes it's fine. But certain patterns can denote or warn you of potential water intrusion or water issues or drainage issues or structural issues. So we want to pay attention to those. And the only way that we know if it changes, it's kind of like that mole that we watch, you know, we have to see if it changes over time. That's when we're concerned. It's the same thing when we look at these staining patterns and things like that. Cracks, it's pretty straightforward. Is the crack supposed to be there? And if not, is it bigger than it was last week, last month, last year? The copings and the stuff and the trim around your facilities. If you got an older building, depending on the era, depending on where you're at in the country, I see a lot of either masonry details that are very, very fancy, or I'll see wood details, and it's awesome. You know, that's that whole construction stuff coming out. Like, ooh, I know what that is. That's a dental detail, or so on and so forth. But we got to check those because, as Tim mentioned earlier in his first one, you know, tube of caulk as a planned maintenance activity, as in recaulking windows and stopping stuff from hurting, that saves you dollars, real dollars in the long term. Window openings and chimneys. Again, I'm not hitting everything. I'm just saying these are kind of the big things we're always looking at. Chimneys are real important, especially if you've removed something that used to require a large chimney, but now just has that PVC pipe jutting out the wall. So if you've upgraded your boilers, for example, many times if you've updated to a new modern high efficiency boiler, you're not having to run the exhaust out a chimney, but you still have a chimney on the roof. The problem is the exhaust gases coming out of a boiler, coming out of any heating system, are not good for masonry. If it's a masonry chimney, a lot of times the linings are bad. It's messed up the mortar. Now you've got this teetering tower of destruction. It's kind of like a Jenga, chimney on your roof, that the wind is the one playing Jenga with it, and nobody wins in that moment. See, that's one of the bad jokes, equating. Anyway, they're just going to get worse, folks. Sorry. But so when we're looking at exterior walls, we're looking at the preventative maintenance. So again, let's go to some pictures, right? So what do we see? What's common as we're looking exterior? So again, we've got some staining patterns that you can see here. We've got water coming off this slate roof coming down onto here. Okay, so that may not be an issue, but I need to monitor it, right? And I need to look. Okay, is that just, what's that from? Maintenance here, you can see the face of the brick. Can y'all see that? It's been popped off. One, it's kind of older brick, but two, water has gotten through not only this planting bed, so there's no kind of water barrier here, excuse me, between here. So we've got moisture in there, and the freeze-thaw cycle has caused the face of the brick to pop off. So again, as we're looking at maintenance, maybe it's digging that out, adding some waterproofing, maybe it's fixing that. As we look here, we see some staining that has some iron in it. So we've got some above that, we've got some lintels that have rusted. And so we've got some iron coming down on this coping. And then we see this mortar is not in the best shape. By the way, if any of you have old brick buildings, be very careful when you're talking about maintenance and tuck pointing, things like that. Depending on when your building was built, the lime content of the mortar is important. It's very important to know that. Modern mortars will damage old masonry if it's not the right one. So you can do a whole heck of a lot of damage that way. So here's some mortar. It's missing. And you can kind of see around there too, the wood the wood has deteriorated. So again, and this is an actual door right here to the right, is one that they enter and exit to access the roof equipment on this particular church. So from a maintenance perspective, this should have been addressed, because it's been seen more probably than any other part of the building, but they're not, in their maintenance stuff, they're not taking care of those things that they see. Same thing here, some mortar issue and that we see here. Why is it going? A little bit of shifting, but not too bad. Now we have some organic growth, I think is how I typically do this, coming out of this bell tower, where you see water getting to the inside, and then it's coming out below this section into there. So now we know we have moisture on the inside plus there. So from a maintenance perspective, I've got to go into the bell tower, figure out where the moisture is coming from, and see if I can stop that from occurring. Otherwise, I need to plan on cleaning this more often, and then maybe adding a mildewcide sealer or a sealer with a mildewcide in it onto the masonry. We have caulking here, and then some staining here above it. You can see here, what do you see here right below that gutter? We see stuff on the brick. Well, that's water coming down the brick. Whoops, it's me going too quick, sorry. It's water coming down the brick. So now from a maintenance standpoint, I need to address this gutter so I can get rid of that. And here we have, you can't see it really well in here. You have the bane of my existence on roofs, silicone. They have silicone caulked where they were having issues between the shingle roof, this copper flashing, and this brick here, and this stucco and masonry over here. Please don't do that. That's not what silicone's good for. There's so much better choices there. Any questions on any of these pictures? And do any of these pictures look like any of your facilities, your buildings? Got any of these stuff there? All right, yep. So again, as we're developing our maintenance stuff, this is stuff, none of this occurred overnight. So this is a continual process, which means, and I'm laying the foundation that I'm hoping to lay, I'm laying the foundation for y'all, that when we talk about a planned maintenance, it's not as simple as do X, Y, and Z. It's being proactive and looking at stuff. So how do you get the gutter people to actually see and fix the things? If in this example with the gutter, I mean, it's obvious that there's water coming through. If you need to prove it, put a hose up there and run it down there. Otherwise, take a picture of it and say, hey, I don't want to see water coming down here. And then just take a look when it's raining to make sure. Cinder block and concrete, you just got to watch the mortar joints, and especially cracking on cinder blocks. We see a lot of structural movement that you'll see through the CMUs, especially if they're not filled or not filled right. Yeah, who doesn't have them? That's true. Yeah. So the evidence, yeah, and that's why it's good to take pictures and do walk-arounds more than once, because you start seeing the change. And that's what's very important. That's what I look for. You know, unfortunately, when I do these facility and condition assessments, I don't always get to see over time. I just get to see the evidence that, and we have to make that assumption, right? Okay. Roof, and I know we're kind of running up on time already, but know your roof and the squares. I'm going to talk about this a little later. Look for evidence of drainage, leaks, ponding, failing flashings and counter flashings, signs of wear, perimeter edge condition. And you may not know all these terms, and that's okay. But partner with somebody who does, and to look at that. And if you can climb up on your roof, walk up on your roof if you can do it safely. It's the best way to get to know it, and it's the best way to get to know the perimeter of your property is to look out. Yeah, going out and look where the water drainage during heavy storm, absolutely. Stay safe, but absolutely. So here's just some quick examples of typical roof stuff that you won't see unless you're being intentional to go out on your roof and do maintenance, like failed joint work here in this middle picture between two pieces of masonry coping. Okay, what's going to happen? That's at the highest point. What gets there? Water. Where does water go? Anywhere it can. So if we were proactive on our maintenance, we put it there. We need to do that. Ponding water on our single ply here, and a ladder left on the roof. We won't talk about that. But there's the drain right there, and there's the three ponding water. Shingles, that most of the shingle material has actually gone off the shingle. This is an old slate concrete roof. It's hard to see here, but did you see the buildup of organic material on it? Same thing here on this ballasted roof. You see these dark spots here. Well, that's where water is actually ponding a little bit underneath the rock. We know that because of the organic that has built there, and then it was a little wet still, and I could tell. Ponding, again, that's an actual cricket, but it's not doing its job because there's ponding water there. Again, some coping issues, obvious ponding water where rust is formed on this roof, and that is actual moss growing on the roof because of how much water gets behind this section of fascia here and takes so long to come out that the water sits there long enough for it to join. Hopefully I'm not showing a lot of your roofs, but again, these are all issues that developed over time. Part of our planned maintenance, preventative maintenance, is actually finding these and addressing them as soon as possible. HVAC, probably all got them. That's our air filters, purifiers, controls. You need to know the lifespan. Tim mentioned earlier, about 15 years is our standard for most size equipment that's out there. You get about 20 years for chillers, you get about 30 years for boilers, and 40 to 50 years on cooling towers. All of that is dependent on usage and on maintenance, right? If you do not maintain your stuff, if you do not do anything with it, it will decrease. But that is a good kind of rule of thumb, if you will. And then if we're not paying attention to it, we're going to decrease operational efficiencies. We're going to spend a lot more money. These are common things that I find. Stuff not being inspected, especially our backflow valves. That's an issue. If it's not working correctly, you can have some issues. See this insulation on our cooling lines. If that's not insulated, that section of copper pipe there, you're losing that much potential coolant out to the atmosphere before it even gets into your building. That's going to cause this unit to run a lot longer. You see some more issues here with where they go into the building and it's not fully sealed. See equipment rooms that you can't access anything because too much stuff is stored there. You see bad drainage or exposed holes where pipes go through that aren't sealed. When you see older units, you can't see some of this stuff, but again, we'll see a lot of units that are past their expected service life. And again, just because they're working doesn't mean they're efficient, right? And hopefully you've got the money to fix it. When we talk about our plumbing, again, these are things that we should be looking at. These are the things that could be addressed through maintenance. And we're looking at our boilers, our fixtures, our sewers, the laterals, all of that stuff. Is it labeled? Things like that. Issues that I find. This is a good issue, so I'm trying to be positive that sometimes, right? They actually labeled when they put the filter in. That's great. We know when it was changed last. But we're seeing where we've had water coming out of this boiler in this connection here, and that's a pop-off valve, and that's good that the water came out, but why is the water coming out? Oh yes, vandalism, people stealing copper tube. I have clients in Houston that have their mechanicals unfortunately behind a iron fence with razor wire. Actual razor wire. It's crazy. So unfortunately, if you do find that you have that issue, copper is what they're going to use. It's what they're after. You just need to put it there, and you might talk to your contractor to see about painting it, marking it, or somehow putting stuff on there, because copper that's marked is not as valuable as, it's number 2 at that point, or even number 3 instead of number 1 copper. So it's not as valuable per pound. And then you can also put out to your local scrap yards that if anybody finds pink painted copper pipe, that just got stolen from us. So there's some options you can have to do that, to try to keep that from happening. But it can happen. But that's also when you're doing your exterior walks from a safety security standpoint. You're looking, do I have adequate lighting on those areas? Do I have motion sensors? Do I even have those simple Nest or Ring cameras right there? It may not prevent it, but at least you'll have something to give to law enforcement. You see good examples, blue and red, which one is cold and which one's hot. These are good maintenance things. So, if you have an issue with your heating loop, you're not wasting time looking at your cold water pipes. Again, this is all planned maintenance, having things clearly labeled. If I ask you to go to this bottom right equipment room and change the filter on A23, you know exactly where to go, right? So taking that time to do those labelings and things. Electrical, and again, I'm going through this a little fast. You'll get the handouts, but if you have any questions, throw them out there. Do you know about your electrical? Do you know the power? Do you know your lighting? What's the efficiency of all your equipment? Is everything labeled in panels and on outlets? You're going to see that again. Hopefully you don't have this. But if you do, hopefully you're finding it on your walkthrough, and this is maintenance. Put the cover back on. Put the cover back on. Talk to your HVAC people. Put that into the cover plate so it's protected. It's so annoying to have an HVAC unit not work because one of these got loose, because it's just dangling there, and when that unit turns on, it vibrates and that comes loose. Are we running too much power through and in certain things? You had a groundhog chew through the wiring to your outdoor sign. How do you find the problem? That's unique, Elaine. That's awesome. I've never heard that. Well, probably not awesome for you, but if you have a groundhog issue, that's, work with your maintenance. There should be, typically, if I understand right, anytime you have any type of boring animal, making tracks, there's usually evidence on the landscape and somewhere, humps or areas or low spots or things that has evidence. So if you have evidence of that, at least okay, maybe we need to treat for those things. And then when the sign goes out, as far as tracing the line, unfortunately, the only way you're going to figure that out is to trace it. Where did it come from and where does it go? And hopefully you have electrical plans that show that, but that can be part of your maintenance activities. If you don't have those, as you're walking through, when you repair that sign, mark exactly where that line goes. And even if it's not energized, they should still be able to find kind of the direction of travel. And then, remove the ground. The holes are all around the wiring. And it's just, that's a fluke. There's not much you can do to stop that besides staying on top of the groundhogs. But just note it, identify it, and if it's a continuing issue, that's when I'd say, okay, let's take it out of the plastic, pipe, and maybe we should put it in a steel pipe or something. How about boiler and chiller water treatment? I'm a fan of closed loop water treatments and having water treatment on closed loop systems. Absolute a fan. It's better for the coils. It's better for the equipment. It's better for everything. If you have not had that and you want to add it, that's fine. Do it slow. The problem is some of the water treatments we'll start to clean the scale. And unfortunately, if you haven't had any, that scale may be what's keeping the water inside your closed loop. So definitely good about it and keeping it. But, and I apologize for, you know, hear my little dogs in the background. They are not being fun. So I'm good about it, but it has to be constantly checked. It has to be constantly maintained. And so you will need to train somebody or pay somebody to come out and check the filters on that closed loop system, to check the chemical treatment, and to make sure that you're not developing any of that, any issues. All right, interior space. We're looking at everything. Excuse me for a moment. I'm going to shut my door. Let me do something real quick. I'm back. Okay. Good question. What frequency should you test your closed water loop? Monthly minimum is what I did when I had a closed water loop, simply because I wanted to find an issue before it became bad. If you have a suspect system, i.e. one that you think is going to develop leaks because of you're putting in this treatment system, you might do it every other week to start until you confirm that it's fine. Or if you change or add the chemical, if you add more, you might increase the frequency until you confirm that it's doing well. But at a minimum, I'm a fan of at least monthly. If it's a brand new system, fully cleaned water treatment from install, you can probably get away with every 3 to 6 months. But for the most part, monthly, unless the installer tells you differently. Interior spaces, as we're walking through. Again, doing this walkabout as we're developing this preventative maintenance. What are we looking for? What type of items are we going to find? Well, one of the big things you're going to end up replacing, the costs in your facility, is obviously your flooring, your carpet, your wood, your tile. When you go to replace that. So how do we extend the life? How do we have maintenance? Well, we're looking for the condition, color, and stains. Is it protected from UV? Is it in pretty good condition? And are we cleaning the stains? Do we have a proper spot cleaning treatment program in place? Carpet, the life of carpet can be extended if it's properly maintained. That means cleaning it and cleaning up stains immediately. Seating, same thing. Checking the condition of the covering of the pews. If you, what have you got there? The seats, wall surfaces, stains, holes, other issues, sticky tack, leftover tape. All of those things can deteriorate the surface condition faster. So as part of preventative maintenance, are we cleaning our walls? Are we cleaning off the things that we use to tape up the decorations during VBS and so forth? Do we have stains? Do we have water stains developing on our ceiling tiles? Again, that alerts us we may have a water issue. So from a maintenance perspective, we want to start and fix that sooner rather than later. And then do you have more stuff than you really need? And right now the answer is yes. Guaranteed, I have not been into one facility that has that does not have more stuff you need. Question: how do you verify the concrete ditches on a property? It's a stormwater runoff. Check your GIS map. It's going to show you, and it should have a layer for the public responsibility, public utilities. And if it's in an easement, it's likely the responsibility of the city or whatever jurisdiction you're is. But start with your GIS and look at your building maps and plans if you have those. If you installed it, you're likely responsible for it. If you didn't install it, if somebody else did, they probably are. So that's how you verify. Start with GIS and start with your building maps. And then it's just a simple call down to the records and say, hey, is this part of utility easement or not? Okay, does that make sense? All right, so interior, typical stains, typical issues that we're finding. Plugs that don't work, extension cords that don't work. That's a maintenance issue. That's also a safety issue. If you see here, that is paint that has gotten beneath the, that has bubbled out because water has gotten beneath it. And then the water drained and then it left that thing there. Great question. Grout between our floor tile, main aisle is crumbling down. Is there any way to fix it other than digging out the grout? No, not if you want to do it right. You have to remove all of the loose grout. Make sure that it became crumbly and loose due to just age and not some other issue like water getting on there that shouldn't. But then take it out. And then when you go back, as you're doing planned maintenance and developing these projects, maybe we look at an epoxy grout, or maybe we make sure that we have a good sealer on it, right? Recommended flooring for very moist basement floor. Epoxy isn't working, and that, well, if epoxy keeps bubbling, the floor, you tried applying it, likely it was too wet. So if it's still coming up, then you got to get that. It sounds redundant, I know, or reductive, but you got to get it dry. You got to get the floor dry first. So we need to figure out where that water is coming from. If you're that close to the water table, and moisture is an issue, and there wasn't proper protection put down on the basement floor when they made it. Now you're looking at maybe working around the outside, putting in some additional drainage on the outside, sealing the outside walls, but then also getting a penetrating water sealant first to actually go down into the concrete to seal it. And what it does is it gets down into the pores and it expands and it creates this water barrier. But again, if you've got water coming up, it's still going to be an issue. It might be drilling a hole down through the floor and creating a way for some sort of drain or pump system in there. But it starts with getting that water out of the concrete before you talk about any flooring, because right now, if it's still that wet, no flooring will work. If epoxy is bubbling, that's just too wet. That'd be my first thing. So I would get a foundation company out there and do moisture meter testing on your concrete in multiple spots first. Question: state maintained geographic information system maps? Yes, that's where I start a lot of my research. If I have facilities I'm working with and they don't have certain data, or the tax records, or that you start seeing the parcel layouts and anywhere you can find that information. So again, these are other interior issues we look for. We see efflorescence on there. We see paint. We see stuff, stains in the carpet, so on and so forth. Question came in: door hardware here. Door trim, the doors wouldn't shut. Gotcha. So you've got double doors here, they're older doors, and you've got need a better seal. So one of the better ways to do that is, especially if they close, you can make sure one side closes before the other. You can put a surface mounted weather strip on the outside of one leaf and on the inside of the other, so that they sandwich, right? And so you have that gap, so you don't have anything in between that's going to cause them to not shut. You could do just an overlap one on the outside. You just always got to make sure that overlapping one shuts first. The other way is to actually go to the door edge and straighten them, trim them, and then put in weather stripping that fills that gap. Wood doors, especially older wood doors, they tend to swell. Trimming them a little bit with a plane or something like that is actually, it's not going to hurt them. And then you can reset that trim and get what you need. Hopefully that helps. Parking lot has several long, wide cracks, maybe very, maybe on the parking lot question here. Would I advocate cutting repair versus repaving? If I can cut it and the substrate is still in good condition, I love straight line patches. Straight line patches are so much better from a long-term sealing stuff. And I also reseal. I'm an advocate of resealing every 3, I like 2 to 4 years, really, depending on if you're scraping for snow, things like that. As long as your substrate is in good condition, crack repair and crack sealing is always a viable option. If the substrate is damaged, you're going to need to repave potentially, because you're going to need to cut out quite a bit to then fix the substrate. Does that make sense? And if I didn't answer or need to add more to any question I'm answering, please let me know. Interior spaces, part of your maintenance. If you've got kitchen and fruit prep serving areas, this is an additional maintenance issue, because there's certain rules you need to follow, right? Check the ice machines inside the bin, especially coffee makers, Keurig. If you got it like a K-cup machine, a Keurig here. One of my favorite pictures to take, I say favorite, one of the pictures I take is I open it up and I take a picture on the inside where you put the K-cup, because it's usually nasty. And that's what we're telling people to go in. Yeah, Michael Figueroa threw out there, astragals between the doors. You can get bristles instead of foam and rubber. Absolutely. Refrigerators and freezers, the door seals with mildew. That's a common area that we find mildew, and it's simply checking to make sure the door seals haven't been damaged or pinched, and then just wiping them down. Again, this is maintenance. Data food items, insect and dirt issues. Again, these don't happen overnight. And so you can see where we have mildew on that ice bin door. We've got a fridge that's in the red. I mean, it's got a big marker there. How much air is getting through that ice machine filter? Probably not too much. You've got water staining and damage on that stuff there. You've got if you've got a can opener like this, that's some of the nastiest stuff I've seen is on those can openers. Peeling paint in a food area, not good. Grease buildup on there, again, dirt on the ice machine. These are things, again, these are all maintenance items. Changing the filters, cleaning the filters, checking the air. These are things that we need to look for. Fire alarm system, it's going to be maintained by somebody with a license, but you just need to be aware and make sure they're meeting the inspection requirements. Make sure the tags are correct. Make sure there's not holes in your space that's supposed to be sealed for fire. Make sure you've got access to your extra nozzles in a fire suppression system. Make sure the protection is still on the nozzles. These are things you should be doing from a preventative maintenance standpoint. Security, again, it's typically maintained by somebody with a license. If you don't, I hope you have a panic button at your main desk. Because everybody, you know, who's your primary security officer usually during the week? It's your receptionist. So do they have the tools they need to bring folks? And then kind of a last little thing, and then this one will be done. Accessibility. Technically, as a church, we're exempt from federal ADA, but not necessarily state ADA, especially if you're building new or getting a certificate of occupancy. However, despite that, we encourage all organizations to create at least one accessible path, accessible walkway to the main worship area, main small group meeting area, and a restroom. Okay. It's about being welcoming to all, right? And nobody wants to say all are welcome except those with mobility issues. And if you're wondering if you're welcoming to those with mobility issues or if you're accessible, grab a wheelchair or grab someone who has accessibility issues and ask them, if you park here, can you get into the building by yourself? And that's the key when we talk to accessibility. Can they navigate by themselves? And so if you can't, keep that in mind. There's some resources. I'm not going to go over that. You'll get that in the handout. And that's it. So the main takeaway when you're establishing a preventative maintenance plan is you need to understand everything that you need to maintain. And so that's the Cliff Notes versions of all the different areas you're looking for that you have to develop those areas to maintain. And that's all I have for this presentation. So Jim, I'm going to throw it back to you and any other questions that anybody else has about anything we've talked about so far.
Great. Thank you very much, Nathan. We'll be hearing from you again at the next segment as well. I do want to add, if you are, even if you're not, but it's easier, if you are planning a renovation or a new building or something like that, we just renovated our, like I said, our historic church And before we did that, though, we created what's called a PPMP, Phase Preventive Master Plan. And we did it, you work with an architect and a contractor, and you work with both of them in a separate contract from the building. And they basically went through, they talked to all the staff, talked to all, parishioners, vestry, to come up with what they see as issues. And then they go through as an architect eyes and a contractor's eyes, and they go through and they built a five phased plan to go from one end of the building all the way to the other to fix all the things that they saw that were wrong with it. And the contractor gives you a price tag for it in today's dollars. So ours ended up being a 5-phase plan. At the time, 2 years ago, was valued at like $20 million to do all of it. It's all gone up since then. We started with our historic church because that was the most pressing need because of structural issues. But the next phase is more geared towards life safety. So sprinkling the all the buildings. They're not all sprinkled right now because they weren't required when they were built. All those type things. And then it goes into more specific things as you go through all the phases. So that's another thing you might want to think about if you don't know where to start or don't know what to do. Oftentimes, you can have architects and contractors. First, you get an architect, and they usually you can hire a contractor that will be the contractor at risk, and just have them go through your buildings and create that plan. Again, it costs dollars to do that. Nobody does it for free that I know of. If you do, give me their number. But I think, in my estimation, it's money well spent. If in the long run. But Nathan, I don't know if you have any experience with those.
Actually, that's the primary thing of what I do for Smart Church Solutions is what we call facility condition assessment. Just is going through all those pictures you saw developed from those. But it's similar, but not exactly like the contractor, what you're talking about. But it's a practical approach to, okay, here's everything I see. Here's monies that it's going to take. Here's timeframes. It's not a capital reserve study or anything like that, but it's very much, this is what you have. This is what needs to be fixed. This is the time frame. And here's some dollars. And once you develop that, and what I found is it's a culture. Culture is the biggest roadblock to some of this preventative maintenance planning and execution than it is than the money or having the plan. It's, oh, but we want to focus on X being ministry, X being present, whatever X is. But it's going to be at the detriment of your facility. And we kind of go into that in this next part, in this next session we'll do after the break, but very much so. That's what we do. We approach it in that software. And again, this is just what we happen to have. There are other companies that do the computerized maintenance management system. It also, if you use that from us, we also provide access to our life cycle calculator, which does very much the same thing. And when I used it as an operations director, I did the life cycle for everything from my playground mulch and landscaping on up to my roofs. So,
right. Excellent. You've been answering the questions as you've been going along, which is great. And there was a couple things about somebody had put in about mice getting into their doors and
yeah,
how to stop that. It's hard to prevent it, but seal them up, rubber seals, better thresholds, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. If nobody else has any other comments at this point, we will take another 5-minute break to give people a chance to, use the restroom, get another coffee or water or whatever, because it's getting kind of late. And then we'll join us back here in 5 minutes. Nathan will lead us in the next part called How to Extend the Life of Your Facility. Yep. So, and probably also at the same time, the life of your facility manager and sextons. So please come back and join us for that. I'll put the timer on 5 minutes, and I hope you return. See you all in a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, Nathan, are you still online?
I am.
Okay. So hopefully everyone's back, and we can get started with our third session. It is called How to Extend the Life of Your Facility. Nathan Parr is with Smart Church Solutions or Pool Solutions. So I'm just going to, if you're on last session, you already know Nathan, so I'm just going to turn it over to him. And again, as always, please put your comments and questions in the chat, and Nathan does a great job of addressing them as he sees them online. If not, we'll address them at the end as well. So Nathan, take it away.
All right, appreciate it. Let me go ahead and do that fun thing of sharing my screen. It'd probably help if I actually put the slideshow up too, huh? Yeah, there we go. All right, so this one is titled How to Extend the Life of Your Facility. And again, as we talk through this and go through this, let me pull up the chat again so I can keep an eye on that. If you have any questions, let me know. We'll go through. And again, I'm going to give you a little outline of how to extend the life of the things that you should do. But again, I'm going to talk about the things that I have noticed and we have noticed over the years of what brings your facility down. If that makes sense, right? So if we can address what brings it down, then we can, by extension, at least stop the downward spiral and at least get positive, right? And that's the whole goal. So we'll start here. It only takes 3 things, right? How awesome is that? It's a 3-point presentation. It only takes 3 things to extend the life of your facility. Personnel, time, and money. That's it. Okay, if you're 100% in those 3 areas, you are good to go. Session over. No, I'm kidding. That's not. So what does that mean for us? Well, before we go deeper down that rabbit trail, I'm going to share something that's passionate to me. And by extension, it's now passionate to you simply because you're looking at my screen. OSHA, it's not a 4-letter word. Churches are not exempt from OSHA. If you've got more than 1 non-clergy personnel on staff, you're not exempt. And that has some very real consequences to how you operate and how we maintain our facility, how we create our preventative maintenance plan. And it really impacts the availability of time to our personnel. And as you'll see as we go through, you're likely short on personnel. They don't have much time. And these are things that are not optional. When we take care of the things that are required, we have even less time to take care of the things that we know we need to do. But it's important. And one thing to change your mind, again, I come from a construction background, so OSHA was not always my friend. I didn't always like it, but I've come to the realization that a lot of the laws, though not always perfect, a lot of the rules and regs that OSHA talks about stem from, gee, somebody died and they didn't have to. And that's how I like to look at OSHA. Let's be realistic about it. Here's why, and it's part. OSHA applies to most of us, not our clergy, when they're performing religious duties. So if the clergy wants to, juggle chainsaws standing on the top of a ladder with an exposed circuit and a bucket of water, more power to them. Don't know what they're trying to prove, but hey, but the minute it's not part of a religious service, being that, it falls under OSHA, so we don't get the option of not being safe. So when we look, common issues that we find, and again, to me, these fall under maintenance. These fall under extending the life of our facility, especially when it comes to life safety stuff. So emergency equipment failure, there's lack of an inspection. 30-second test monthly, 90-minute test annually. That comes from the rules. Portable fire extinguisher inspection failure. The certification that you get probably annually, that has to be done by a licensed person. The monthly check can be done by anybody trained to do it. Hazardous communication, there's no training on file, no SDS book, improperly labeled secondary chemical containers. Ladder safety and inspections, they're not happening. There's no certification or inspection on record. Or the tags have been ripped off or painted over that say what it's rated for. Aerial lift, they're not inspected, and there's no fall protection available, no training. And exit route obstructions. That's a big one. People put stuff anywhere and it covers it. And so these are examples of a lot of those issues, like don't store propane tanks inside the building next to above there, you can't see it, flammable paints and stuff. Don't have exposed electrical, don't have life safety devices that are expired, don't have exit lights that don't work, improperly labeled secondary chemical containers. Probably not a good idea to put a water heater above a non-GFI outlet, you know. So these are all things. So again, as we're talking about extending the life, it's like extending the life of the people in your building, not just your facility. But these are all things that we need to pay attention to. This all pulls from the available time and money and personnel and all of that it takes to maintain your facility and extend the life. So hopefully you get it and you understand it. It's not optional. It can lead to fines. You can get shut down. And unfortunately, ignorance is not a legal defense for lack of compliance. Doesn't matter if you know or not. You all can't actually say that anymore. Now you know. You're required. We have lots of information on this. I'd love to talk to you about it. It's an area that I feel very passionately about. So include this in any maintenance and planned maintenance evolution plan that you come up with as being compliant. That's that culture, that's changing that mindset that says, yes, our mission and what we've been called to do, that's very, very, very important. That's our driver. But if we've been entrusted with a facility, with it comes responsibilities. And this is one of the main areas. And again, keeping people alive is great. That's a good thing to put on your thing. You know, people don't die here. Yeah, sorry, anyway, I digress. So OSHA, not a 4-letter word. It's very important for you. But let's go back to the 3 things we need, right? Personnel, time, and money. Does anybody, raise your hand? Unlimited budget? Anyone? Probably not. You probably have staffing shortfalls. There is a way to multiply your staffing. We're going to talk about that. We've already mentioned it once. And it is through intentional and planned deployment of CMMS, EMS, or HVAC controls. How much are we actually short-staffed? I've had one church in 6 years come close to the recommended staffing levels. One. That's over 6 million square feet of church property, almost close to 7 million now, with inadequate staff to maintain it properly. So we are decreasing the life of our churches. On average, churches tend to be understaffed by 1.3 full-time equivalent for maintenance and 1.2 for custodial, which equates to 5,200 average hours of short staffing, of time not available to take care of your building. That's a big deal. That's a pretty big shortfall. And when we say the 1 per 35, and I go into this in detail, but I'm going to just throw that out here. That's 1 per 35 for maintenance, and that's 1 per 35,000 for custodial. Not both, right? So that would be 2 FTEs. If you have a 35,000 square foot building, national averages say it would take at a minimum 1 FTE to maintain it and 1 FTE to clean it. So that's 2 people. Make sense? Hope so. But again, we're short-staffed. Because we're short-staffed and we're talking about extending the life, we're going to lose time with miscommunication. We're going to spend more money correcting communication issues because there is a cost to poor communication. We're going to lose time handling maintenance, cleaning, and preventative maintenance activities. So we can't extend the life if we can't do the work because we can't figure out what we should be doing because we have poor communication. And we're going to put undue stress and time constraints on the facility operations teams, right? That's not a good way to extend the life. That's actually the formula to shorten the life, not only of the facility, but of the team. And that's not good. So I mentioned there's a cost, right? Well, who here likes data? If you're like me, you kind of like some data. We want to know, what does this mean for us? Well, there's some research done. Average 7.5 hours a week is lost to poor communication. Okay, that's almost a full workday. Half of the time is spent communicating with the majority experiencing issues during that time. So 50% of our week is in communicating, and most of the time it's bad. We can't do the things that need to get done. We need tools to make it easier, right? And poor communication negatively impacts. You know it, I know it. If I didn't tell you and show you that you're required to be compliant with OSHA, if I came into your building and say, hey, you need to do the weekly, or excuse me, the monthly portable fire extinguisher stuff, without the context, you're like, you're crazy. I get them inspected every year, because that's all you knew. Now you know differently because I've taken the time to communicate the reason why you need to do it. Or if you want that rule, by the way, I can get it to you. I have it. Make sense? So what does that mean dollars and cents wise? About $47 per person per calendar day. So about $1,000 a month, roughly per person, 12,000 per year. So imagine that. How much money are you losing out the door through poor communication that can't go to extending the life of your building because we can't spend it and be more efficient and effective with what we're doing, right? So take the number of employees you have, say you have 10, it's 120 grand a year. What could you do with 120 grand for your facility? Could any of you use 120 grand being back in, being brought back into the actual work of your facility? Does anybody not want that? No. Okay. So when we have that cost, so we've got some existing technology that we've talked about a little bit, and these are the computerized maintenance management systems, scheduling systems, integrating with things. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those. But with that existing technology, we can reduce miscommunication. We can make sure everybody's on the same page. So we know I need to shut down this room so I can do the maintenance on it. You can have it tomorrow. Certain tasks can become automated when it's based on good data, reducing bio-based mistakes. That means the mistakes we make as people. I don't turn an AC on if a room's not actually scheduled. By not running the unit more often than I need to, I potentially extend the life of that unit. By not running the electrical, I save money, which then I can take that money and reinvest it in maintaining my facility. Question has been asked, what do I mean doing monthly fire extinguisher inspections? What does that entail? If you look on the back of a portable fire extinguisher on the tag, you see the front tag, and it should be clicked on a year and a date, right? And so if it's 2023 now, so if I see a fire extinguisher on the front of the tag and December 2022 is clipped, that means it was certified in December of 2022, and its certification lasts till December of 2023. It lasts for 1 year. Flip the tag over. On the back side of the tag, there are 12 slots. 12 months to a year, that's the 12, that's the monthly inspection to say the fire extinguisher is still good. And what are we inspecting? It's very simple. I'll walk you through it, talk you through it right now. Is the fire extinguisher where it's supposed to be with the correct signage above it? Yes or no? Great. Is the dial still pointing in the green? Great. Is the safety pin and safety tag and cable still attached? Great. Is the hose in good condition and still on the fire extinguisher? Yes. Great. I like to pick them up and tip them over to look at the bottom and look at the outside of the unit. Make sure the powder gets moved around. It's got powder in it. I also ensure that the casing is in good condition. I put it back. I have just done the monthly inspection. It is that simple. But if you've got a large building, that takes time. Again, we're talking about personnel, right? It takes somebody to do that. And anytime we're doing that, we're not lubricating a door. We're not fixing a tile. And I believe in our free resources, we do have some stuff that is checked on the monthly fire extinguisher inspection, and you can find YouTube videos on it. I've got resources It's very simple to find, very easy to do. Information regarding inanimate systems can be relayed to the human operators prior to failure when we include these systems. Again, how do we maximize our personnel without actually hiring somebody? We get a device to monitor our equipment. So if it starts to vibrate wildly because a motor has come out of sync with something on our HVAC unit, it can alert us that you've got a crazy vibration. So the cost per system procurement, implementation, deploying it, getting it running and everything is almost always significantly less than an additional employee, especially for tasks that don't require a person. So as we're going through our building and we're looking at stuff, our goal is what can we automate? What can we do that I can have a system do so I don't have to have a person doing it? And so why is this important when it comes to personnel? Well, we know from our benchmark studies that 40% of the daily work time for custodians is lost to non-custodial tasks. Maintenance teams lose up to 50% of their time. Communication is for some, but not all of that lost time. And the time lost due to miscommunication, non-relevant tasks grows almost exponentially in your facility. And that's, so we're losing, we're limited on staff anyway, because we're inefficient, because we're doing these things. And when we're trying to extend the life, we're losing even more time. And what's non-custodial task, what's non-maintenance task? It's anything that's not maintaining something that's non-maintenance. So if I'm asking my maintenance team to move water from point A to point B, or to move stuff, that's not necessarily a maintenance task. That's a logistics function, but maybe we need to rethink who we're having do that. Because if I'm paying for a well-trained maintenance person, do I really want to pay my $35, $40 an hour person who knows how to fix equipment to move a dolly of water from point A to point B? Or would it make more sense to hire a porter to do work like that? Same thing with custodians. If I've spent the time to train them how to clean properly, do I really want them moving Sunday school literature from the main office to another room when they could be cleaning and disinfecting and extending the life of my facility because they're keeping it clean, extending the life of my carpet because they took care of those spot treatments? Question came up, what's an SDS book? SDS is safety data sheet. You may, if you're old school, like me, I grew up, it was MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheet. Long time ago, several years ago rather, it changed to SDS. It's all been standardized under the global harmonized system for all this fun stuff. It's a 16-part form, the SDS form. If you clean your building and you have chemicals in your building, which I know all of you do, you are supposed to keep an SDS book on site listing all of the chemicals that you use in the building. You're actually supposed to keep that data for the length of the time you use that chemical plus 30 years. But hey, we're not going to go down that rabbit trail too far. And an SDS book there's a proper way to set it up. You've got a table of contents, everything's listed in alphabetical order, so on and so forth. There's a whole thing when it comes to hazardous communication. SDS is part of that whole thing of hazardous communication to include training and alerting and things like that. But that's what an SDS is. And from the Q&A, how do we know what size fire extinguishers need in particular areas? Generally, that's determined when the building was built. Most of the time, you're going to see 10 BC fire extinguishers. And that's a 10-pound fire extinguisher rated for B and C materials. There's different ratings, A, B, C, K, for different types of extinguishers, okay? If you have an IT room, if you have AV room, you should not have a BC extinguisher because it's got powder in it. You should have a CO2 extinguisher. It removes oxygen from the air. It doesn't smother it with powder, because if you use a BC extinguisher on your sensitive electronic equipment, you're replacing that equipment. Whereas if you use a CO2, the stuff that wasn't on fire, you don't have to replace. So there's different things. And we see some notes here. You can find that information from your local supplier as well. And so just be aware there's lots of different types and sizes. It's a great question. Your CO2 extinguishers are generally going to be bigger, and your monthly checks on those as you're actually weighing them, because it doesn't have a pressure gauge on it. And so there's just different things you learn, but any supplier can give you the information on how to do that. So hopefully that that helps. So again, we've got this communication, we've got personnel, and we're losing time. So how do we maximize that? I told you we're going to talk about some of these systems. Again, this is how we extend the life, is we address these shortfalls so that we can actually accomplish the mission that's set before us. CMMS, Computerized Maintenance Management System. As mentioned before, we're pretty proud of what we've developed in the work order and asset management system because it's church-centric. It's not designed to do NASA level maintenance, tracking, and engineering and stuff, but none of us work for NASA. We work for the church, right? But it's also not pen and paper or an Excel spreadsheet, which, while effective at times, is not something that is sustainable long term, and it doesn't help you in the long term maintenance and actually tracking and doing those things. An event scheduling system. Why is this important? Well, again, how do we know how often an area is used? How do we do projected projects replacements? How do we do that unless we know how much our building's actually being used? Again, pen and paper, not the most effective. We should have something online that everybody can access, again, so that we can reduce those communication issues. Access control, digital media systems so that we can share information, and energy management system that can be some thermostats, that could be a more robust system. And all of these systems, keep in mind, there isn't a, oh my gosh, I'm a small facility, I'm a small parish, I don't need it. Wrong. You're probably short-staffed. If you can take a function and put some of the work on an electronic system that we don't have to pay like an employee, then we gain time back. It's more efficient. So small, large, it's just a matter of scale. It's beneficial. Okay. Some of these other ones that we might see that we can talk about. And again, if you have more questions, we're happy. We've got tons of free resources. We also have our Facebook group. I hope you're a part of that, where you can ask some of these questions more in depth. And I bet Lee could put a link on that as well at some point. We'd love to have you as part of that. Other systems you might see: lighting, irrigation, logins for computers, biometric scanning, stuff like that, fire alarms, intrusion alarms. And these are all things, and all of this is related to the concept of Internet of Things. For you, unless you're an IT person or just really kind of in this industry, IoT or Internet of Things, you may have heard it, you may not really understand it. That's fine. All you need to know is it's a suite of things that allow you to move stuff to the cloud, to interconnected devices, to be able to share information across different mediums. Okay, it makes our lives easier when it's properly set up and properly executed. So there you go. Thank you, Phil, for throwing that, the SDS safety data sheet. Again, used to be the MSDS. And any chemical you purchase, every manufacturer is required to have one and make it available to you. There is no cost for an SDS sheet from the manufacturer. They won't. They might charge you, but they're not supposed to. Okay. So real numbers, again, real numbers, real data, because that's important. From our benchmarking survey. What did we serve? We served cool stuff. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Using an event scheduling system like eSpace, okay? 3 hours a week per person in time saved if you convert from an inefficient system or pen and paper to something that is linked like that. 3 hours times $18 an hour. That's like cost to the church of an employee, hopefully it's $54 times 52 weeks. That's $2,800 per person annually. If you got 3 people, that's $8,000 annually. If you add integration, you could save an additional 3 hours. You could potentially reduce your shortfall. Remember that 5,000 hours of shortfall by 468 hours. So every staff member you add could add another 156, depending on your size. 5,600 annually in redeem time to invest in activities that may be neglected, stuff that causes deferred maintenance. That's how we get that time back to maximize our personnel. So Elaine has a great question, and actually thank you for putting it out there, or comment. 45 members, 70-year-old building, 1 priest, handicap development team for cleaning, part-time secretary, and Sunday only musician. Average age of congregant 60. Whether this seems possible. It's going to be difficult. It can be, but setting it up, doing the data collection, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, getting the paperwork, getting it stuff written down, getting the information and that is one of the best things to start with. If you have a map where you have all of your life safety devices marked, you would be ahead of probably 70% of churches that I work with. That's it. Just doing that, where you take a building layout and say, I have a fire extinguisher here, here, and here. I have an AED here. This is an exit door. This is an exit door. This is where my electrical comes in. This is where the water cutoff is. If you have something like that, you're better than 70%. Okay, start with that. The information and the data collection is one of the most important things any size congregation can do when it talks about extending the life. If I don't know where something is, I can't tell somebody to look at it if I'm calling in a contractor to work. So get that information developed first, okay? And then we go from there. Then we build it up. Maybe we connect with a local high school that has an NHS program. And a lot of them have to do get hours for public service. Well, how about working with you for the next 6 months of the school year to come in and inspect your fire extinguishers, or this, that, or the other. Boy Scout projects, things like that. We can connect with our community to connect with some of these people that, again, don't have to be trained, just to help keep you safe and to walk through. And yes, Elaine, we got to get it out of your head. That's the issue that we find. Even myself, when I first started, I knew a lot. That means absolutely nothing if I'm driving the bus and I drive off a cliff, right? Because that information goes with me. That's why that computer maintenance management system is good, or at the very least, getting it out on a piece of paper. And I love the fact that you said, okay, that I can do. Absolutely, you all can do this. So again, by adding some of these systems, getting that information out, we increase. One thing, make sure you talk to all the people who need to be spoken to about this change. Make sure everybody's on board. That way we're not fighting against each other. Your admin, your IT, accounting, finance, operations team, service providers, pastoral staff, clergy, all those folks, they need to be part of it. Smart technology. Here's something, a warning, any technology, especially if it's something that we're using to extend the life of our building. Waste company surveys, we know about 37% of the software spend is wasted. That's significant dollars. That's dollars we don't want to waste, because if we weren't going to use it, we should have used it to take care of something. Why do they waste it? Because they don't know what they have. I've worked at churches that had no idea all the different systems they were using, or the capabilities. To point two, they didn't know what the system can do. And we talk to them and we go, you know, you have one system that can do all those things that those 3 or 4 other systems you're paying for are doing. Reduce the number of systems. Now you've freed up capital to put back into the building to maintain your facility, right? Makes sense? And we can it's only effective if we use it well, right? So just, you may be used to the pen and paper, but if you go electronic, get used to the electronic. You can do it. Trust me. I've trained lots of churches and lots of skill levels. I have yet to have someone who can't get it. Okay, I have sometimes more confident in the tech skills of people I work with than they do. Sometimes you get what's cheap, and sometimes you get what you pay for. You need to get the best in class. You need to know your real needs and get it. And then training. Without training, you're not using it. And all those things, it negates what you've just gained in personnel efficiency if you don't actually use it. Make sense? So we don't want to do that. So personnel, what's number 2? Y'all remember first slide, personnel, money, right? Money. All right, if you're an OJ's fan, like I am, You know where that song comes. Now it's in your head too. It's been in my head all day. Debt-free. Had this conversation last week, actually. A lot of churches that are debt-free, but more accurately, it's probably mortgage-free for many of them. And if you got a paid-for facility, awesome, great. But it doesn't mean that you're free from debt. It just means your debt looks different. And that debt is personnel, debt of time, and debt and funding levels. Tim talked about it. I'm going to talk about it too. If you're not funding and taking care of the facility properly, that's debt. It's debt deferred or deferred maintenance, right? And that's not going to extend the life of our building. It's actually going to shut it down. So when we talk about that, existing items, that's deferred and planned maintenance. What's going to happen? I like the 15-year mark. Why do I like the 15-year? Why do I think in 15 years? Because what's the average expected service life of a commercial HVAC unit? Anyone? 15 years, right? So I like to look at things in 15-year blocks, because if I replace a unit this year, 15 years from now, what should I have cash to do? Replace that unit. I divide it immediate 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10, 10 to 15. Why? Because that's what I like to do. The big three: roofing, HVAC, and parking lots. Not only do those have a high economic cost to the church when it comes to maintenance, it's got certain things you need to do to maintain it, to get that long service life. But failure in any one of those three areas can shut your building down, right? So when we're talking about developing that planned maintenance and extending the life, we really need to concentrate and make sure those three are good to go. Then flooring, and then we start looking at kind of the projects, exterior needs, interior needs, things like that. Don't try to list everything when you're going through this. Start the list with the items and projects that have the greatest positive impact, then add on to the list as you go. Otherwise, it is completely overwhelming, right? That's one of the things when I do facility condition assessments for folks. I don't list everything, and I'm very explicit about that, because at some point you see a number and your mind just blanks off, and that's not productive either. Okay. Custodial funding. When we talk about that, it's the 1 FTE per 35,000 square foot, right? That equates to about $1.50 to $2.50 a square foot. That's the goal. If you don't fund it properly, those cleaning activities that aren't getting done actually deteriorate the life of your facility. It's also a negative first impression for a first-time guest, which is not good. Most facilities that I have worked with have a poor cleaning plan, inefficient equipment, and lack initial and follow-on training. That doesn't mean that they're not taking care of or at least meeting a standard in the primary areas they need to. It just means that they could do more with less if they were trained and equipped properly. If we're not cleaning everything and doing the deep cleaning, that adds to the wear and tear of our facility. Again, if I track in dirt and I don't get the dirt out, that dirt's tracked throughout the facility. It impacts other flooring areas. It gets into my HVAC. It gets into all that stuff. And so it also impacts the indoor environmental quality as well. So any questions on custodial before I move on? All right. I went on anyway. Sorry, that was kind of rude of me, but hey, I did. So maintenance, again, it's the 1 FTE per 35,000 square feet. And that funding, we typically want to see between $2.25 and $3 a square foot. That's what it takes. Again, the ZERT averages developed not only through our research, but through IFMA, ISSA, and those other organizations. That's what we do. When you don't fund maintenance, you get an accelerated rate of decline, which is supposed to be that 3 to 4% annually, right? That happens regardless. Even if you're not using your building, it's still deteriorating at that rate, at a minimum rate. A facility that's not well maintained, not only is it a negative first-time impression, it's also one that's going to likely be a target for crime. Because if you don't take care of a broken window, if you let your facility look bad, it tells those professional criminals that you don't care. And if you don't care, then you're not going to see them when they run in and steal your copper or steal a unit or break in. And I don't mean to say that you that had your copper is you're not taking care of your building, but if we're not maintaining it, it gives a bad impression. Again, and if we're underfunded in maintenance, I open the session. We've got some required things. That's generally what gets ignored. And those are the things that will actually lead to big fines and potentially shut you down if you're not doing it. And every maintenance dollar deferred costs you 3 to 4 times more for the future repair. Sometimes even more. Just worked with a facility that 5 years ago. 5 years ago, they had the opportunity to replace 2 aging chillers that aren't even fabricated anymore, and it was going to cost them $1 million. They decided, no, it's fine. We can keep PC parting it on, and we want to do some other ministry emphasis. The current estimate to replace those chillers, which are still failing, and part of this system, is now $4.5 million. And so that was 5 years ago. So it's just, if we defer it, we're taking a risk. Okay. So again, we're talking about the money, and then the capital reserve, 2 to 4 is what Tim said. I want you to at least set a 1 to 2, because a lot of times what I'm seeing is less than $1, if anything, with the over 6 million square feet that I've evaluated. And that capital reserve funding, like Tim said, that's intended to replace the current assets or planned maintenance activities on current assets. It's not new projects. It's not new stuff. If it didn't exist already, that capital reserve is not for the new things. So that's personnel, and that's a little bit of time and a little bit of money, right? That's only the 3 things that we need. So what does that mean for us? Well, here's this simple outline that I told you that I was going to give you kind of after I threw all this information on there. Compliance first, okay? Because lack of compliance can shut us down. It'd be silly to be red tagged, and that's when, like, the fire marshal tags your building and you can't get it until something is fixed, for something that could have been done simply and easily. So compliance first. OSHA, local, state, federal guidelines and requirements planned for and followed. It's that simple. Again, that's how we extend the life. That's how we develop this maintenance plan. Staffing checkup. Do we meet the recommended level plus depth? And when we say FTE, that's full-time equivalent. So if it's volunteer, if it's staff, if it's paid labor, meaning outsourced, whatever it takes to get to that number, that's what we're looking for. And if we've got paid staff, we need to account for vacation, sick, and holiday hours in addition to time off task. So keep that in mind as an administrator. And I'm running into this, and our new survey is actually kind of looking at this is, okay, yes, you have this many full-time employees, but how many hours of time away do they have available to them? Because that directly impacts their available hours to work. And then when we take the 50% that they're off task, you see how that's reduced the actual hours you have available to get things done. And so that's why we look at that. Add technology wherever you can. Again, if I can get a task like changing the thermostats on an app rather than having to physically go to a thermostat, I'm now saving time and money and personnel, because I don't have to send 4 or 5 people to change 10 thermostats real quick. I can just go on my phone, change them, boom, I'm done. If it's linked with an event scheduler, I don't even have to do that. I just schedule an event, it's scheduled. If I cancel an event, the events are out of the thermostats. Okay, I'm not paying anybody to do that. Fund appropriately. Again, most of our funding that we find, we gave you those guidelines, the 225 to 3 for maintenance, $1.50 to 250, or what it was for custodial. Take your square footage, or take the amount that you spend for your custodial staff and custodial supplies divided by your square footage. That's what you're investing right now. If your investment is less than kind of the median or the minimal, then you're not going to extend the life of your facility, because you're not investing in enough to do that. It's actually the opposite. And planned maintenance and inspection scheduling, kind of from the first session in this, we walk around, get an idea of what you got, get an idea of where it's worse and where it's better, so we know how to plan that maintenance, where we need to spend more effort and time versus that. We've got to be able to prioritize. The only way we can do that is if we actually understand and know what we have. And then data collection, as we mentioned earlier, when I said to Elaine, Data collection, this is probably one of the most underutilized things in churches today is simple data collection. I'm a data geek. You guys are administrators. You folks are administrators. You like data too, right? Get a spreadsheet. If you can put it electronically, great. Get it on a shared document. Total square foot of facility, square foot of each space, roofing age, type, the squares, when it was done, who you used, parking lot size, age, last reseal. We mentioned Google Earth. I use Google Earth a lot to measure stuff because I don't have to be super accurate. I have to be fairly accurate, as accurate as Google Earth is when it comes to measuring roof lines and getting roof size and parking lot size. And know your number of events per space per year, because that's going to help you identify where to invest in your facility first, where you need to increase potentially the refresh cycle to keep it looking well and maintained. All locations of utilities and mechanicals, listing of the HVAC and plumbing equipment. And that's the unit, where it's located, its serial number and its model number. With the serial number and model number, you can tell everything you need to know about that piece of equipment. Listing of all the plumbing, so that's your boilers, your chiller, any of that, or boilers and hot water heaters, things like that. And any other major assets, their age and their value. And then at some point, it needs to go like into a life cycle calculator, something that we talked about earlier in the last session. Jim and I had talked about. So how much should you set aside annually to be able to pay cash to replace it when it comes due? And that's the simple outline of how do we increase and how do we extend the life of our building. This is the foundational needs to do that. If you don't have this as your foundation, anything that you do will work, but will not work as effectively or efficiently as it could if you did these things. And that's kind of the point I wanted to make and get to. And once you have all that, then we have everything that we need to properly plan projects, replacement activities, and address those shortfalls. Okay. That is what I have for this. So is there any other questions about anything that I've shared or we've talked about? And Jim, I'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Nathan. I've been checking the chat. There's no questions. You were presenting, giving a lot of information that people appreciated. If anybody does have a question, just drop it into the chat, and we can. Nathan will address it. It seems like a lot, and I know there was a comment earlier about a small parish with not much resources. How do we do all this? And I think, as Nathan pointed out, if I remember right, was you don't have to do all of this all at once, but you need to start somewhere. You need to start somewhere. And if it's just starting with the monthly inspection of your fire extinguishers, at least that's a start, and then build from there. And you don't have to do all this by yourself. You can ask for volunteers in your parish to help with the inspections. And when they're here on a Sunday, you can services and have them walk through with a checklist and mark off where they all are or things like that. There's a myriad of things that, and again, I put in the chat earlier that some of these things, like if you need to find out where your systems are, a lot of times you have parishioners that are HVAC contractors, electrical contractors, plumbing contractors, and a lot of times they'll just go through the building for you and say, this is what I see that you're going to need to address, and this is kind of what it's going to cost. Not that they're going to get the work or anything like that, but a lot of them will just be happy to help because they understand the cost of not doing anything. It's always more expensive later than it is today.
I was going to add too, I think ignorance is a big factor into it too. And I think even if you don't have the resources, let it be financial resources or time or any of the other kind of ways Nathan communicated, at least identifying what needs to be done in the future and establishing at least the identification of what needs to be done and making that visible to the people who may be able to help. Because to one person, it is extremely daunting, but typically we have teams for a reason as well. So if we can bring other people involved and create clarity, and I think a big thing, a big issue with facilities is it's almost siloed off from everybody else because it may be intimidating, difficult to understand, or just not in their quote unquote sphere of atmosphere. So I think if you share this information, the more the merrier. That's always been my take on it too.
So
Check.
we have a live question over here from the question and answer. The resource vault, I know on Smart Church Solutions, yes, we list pretty much all of these data points that I've discussed. We have webinars that, if you check out our YouTube channel, that address a lot of these additional webinars that we've done. And the, our Facebook group, I know I mentioned that before, a lot of those other churches and churches across the country, when I say our Facebook group, we don't drive it, we host it. It's parishes and churches across the country helping each other. Real practical stuff from those things. So I encourage you to check that out, but they'll have those resources too. But yes, we have a lot on that, our free resources and in our manuals and in our YouTube videos and our Facebook. So I encourage you to check out all those resources that we've made available for you for that. And those are all free.
All right. Thank you, Nathan. And on that note too, I want to encourage you, if you are not a member of the Episcopal Parish Network, to please contact them. It's episcopalparishes.org. You will also be able to find this workshop and the tiles. I think tomorrow is at episcopalparishes.org/upcoming-workshops, or you can just go to the main website and navigate your way around. It's also in the chat. The link is in the chat. I'd also like to remind folks and invite folks who are parish administrators or either are doing the job without the title, that we do have a parish administrators group within the Episcopal Parish Network, and we meet monthly. We've had several workshops throughout the last couple of months. Last month or a week ago was on security. And in this one we're partnering with the Episcopal Parish Networks as a whole to bring Lee and Tim and Nathan to you to talk about facilities. So, and typically a monthly one, it's kind of a free flowing. We try to have a topic, but people are free to bring up topics that it may be, front and foremost in their lives of the church. So I encourage you to do that as well. If you'd like to join, again, you can email me at jim.l@stdave.org or get in contact with the Episcopal Parish Network through their website. Email them and let them know that you want to be on the email mailing list, and we'll be happy to welcome you and help you do your job as everybody else on that group helps all of us do our jobs. I'd like to
if I can add to that.
Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that as well, Jim. I'm not associated with the Episcopal Parish Network, but it speaks very highly of them to proactively seek out our organization to help speak on facilities and our specialty to provide this kind of education to their audience. So we were very impressed by it. And we've always been impressed by the Episcopal Parish Network. So highly recommend it, coming from an outside source as well, just from the years that I've known the folks there.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lee. I would like to thank Lee and Tim Kuhl and Nathan Parr for taking their time out today and spending several hours with us, imparting all their wealth of information. I would also like to thank Joe Swimmer, who was our host for this, and the Episcopal Parish Network. Again, that group does great work, and Joe also does great work. So if no more questions, doesn't look like. If you do have questions and you think about it after you get off the phone and somebody says, did you find out about this? And you forgot to ask, again, just shoot us an email or get in touch with Joe, and we'll get the question answered for you. So again, Nathan, Lee, Tim, Joe, thank you all so much for participating and for hosting this. And I hope to see you real soon and work with you more in the future. Thank you all very much.
All right. Thank you all.